They wanted to watch her break. Every candle in the Ashford ballroom flickered like a predator's eyes, casting golden light across silk gowns and jeweled throats. Laughter rose and fell in waves, cruel and deliberate, as the most powerful families in the realm circled their latest entertainment, a disgraced young woman with nowhere left to run. Elara Vance stood frozen at the edge of the banquet hall, her second-hand dress suddenly feeling like rags beneath the weight of 200 aristocratic stares. Across the room, Duke Kael Draven sat alone at the high table, a dark silhouette against the firelight, watching nothing and no one. "Go on," Lady Margrave hissed, her smile venomous, "or your family loses everything tomorrow." Alara's hands trembled. She could sit beside the monster everyone feared, or condemn her family to absolute ruin. She chose fear, and walked straight into the storm. If you want to see how a single moment of courage can rewrite an entire destiny, stay with me until the very end. Drop a like, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, and let's begin this journey together. The Ashford estate had never looked more beautiful, nor more dangerous. Carriages lined the circular drive like a procession of jeweled beetles, their polished lacquer gleaming under lantern light. Footmen in crimson livery opened doors with military precision, ushering the realm's elite into a world of marble columns, imported chandeliers, and champagne that cost more than most families earned in a year. Elara Vance had arrived in a rented carriage that smelled of old leather and desperation. She stepped onto the cobblestones with practiced grace, her chin high despite the threadbare lace at her sleeves. The invitation clutched in her gloved hand was real, sent by some distant cousin who'd taken pity on her family's recent collapse. But it felt like a noose disguised as kindness. "Miss Vance?" The majordomo's voice was flat, professionally neutral. He didn't need to sneer, his tone did it for him. She handed over the invitation and walked through doors that had once welcomed her parents as equals. Now she was a ghost haunting rooms where she no longer belonged. The ballroom opened before her like the mouth of something vast and hungry. 200 guests glittered beneath a ceiling painted with classical scenes of triumph and conquest. Orchestral music swirled through the air, mingling with the scent of roses, roasted meat, and expensive perfume. Servers moved like shadows between clusters of nobility, their trays balanced with impossible precision. Elara had been to 1,000 gatherings like this. She knew every rule, every subtle gesture, every coded phrase that separated the worthy from the disposable. She also knew, with bone-deep certainty, that she no longer counted among the worthy. Whispers followed her across the room like ripples across water. "Vance, girl, can you believe? Father lost everything in that mining scheme. Heard they're selling the manor. Probably here begging for scraps." She kept her expression serene, a mask she'd perfected over 3 brutal months of social dismemberment. When your father gambled away a fortune on a fraudulent investment, when your family name became synonymous with gullibility and failure, you learned to smile through the vivisection. "Elara, darling." The voice sliced through the murmurs like a blade wrapped in honey. Lady Genevieve Margrave swept toward her, trailing a wake of sycophants and expensive silk. Her gown was midnight blue, cut to emphasize wealth rather than taste, and her smile was the kind that made small animals freeze in terror. "How wonderful that you could join us," Genevieve purred, linking her arm through Alara's with possessive force. "We were just talking about you." The cluster of young nobles behind her tittered. Elara recognized most of them: Baron Whitley's vapid son, the Huntington twins who'd once competed for her attention, Lord Ashford's niece who'd borrowed Alara's jewelry and never returned it. A month ago, they would have bowed. Now, they looked at her the way servants looked at broken china. "How kind of you to think of me," Elara said evenly. "Oh, we think of you constantly," Genevieve replied, steering her toward the refreshment tables with iron determination. "In fact, we've been discussing your future. What prospects does a girl in your situation have these days?" The question hung in the air like poison. "I manage," Elara said. "Do you?" Genevieve's eyes glittered. "Because I heard your family is 3 weeks from eviction. Your mother's jewelry is already at the pawnbroker. Your younger sister had to withdraw from Madame Crestwood's academy because you couldn't pay the tuition." Each word landed like a physical blow. Alara's fingers tightened on her fan until the ivory spines creaked. "Careful," she said softly. That fan cost more than your father's conscience. The group went silent. For one heartbeat, Alara saw genuine shock flicker across Genevieve's face. A reminder that once, not long ago, the Vance family had wielded influence that could end careers and reputations with a single well-placed word. Then Genevieve's smile returned, colder and sharper. "How delightful," she said. "You still have claws. That will make this so much more entertaining." She gestured toward the high table at the far end of the ballroom, where the most distinguished guests sat in an elevated tier above the common rabble. And there, isolated at the corner like a predator that even other predators avoided, sat Duke Kael Draven. Alara's breath caught. She had never seen him in person before. Few people had. The Duke was a ghost story whispered in parlors, a name invoked to frighten children into obedience, a reputation built on ruthlessness so absolute that even the crown tread carefully around him. He looked exactly like the rumors promised, and nothing like them at all. Tall, powerfully built, with the kind of aristocratic features that would have been beautiful if they weren't carved from something harder than marble. Dark hair pulled back with military precision. A black coat tailored with such exactness it might have been armor, and eyes, cold, measuring, utterly devoid of warmth, that swept across the room like a warlord surveying a conquered city. He wasn't eating, wasn't drinking, wasn't engaging with the fawning nobles who occasionally approached his end of the table with offerings of conversation. He was simply waiting. For what, Alara couldn't imagine. "The Duke arrived an hour ago," Genevieve said, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that ensured everyone nearby could hear. "Apparently Lord Ashford invited him personally. Some business arrangement. Terribly important." "How fascinating," Alara said, trying to steer away. Genevieve's grip tightened like a vice. "He's dining alone," she continued, "which seems rather rude, don't you think? A man of his status should have companionship. Someone suitable." The trap crystallized in Alara's mind with horrible clarity. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't what?" Genevieve's smile was radiant with cruelty. "I'm simply suggesting that you, as a woman of breeding and education, despite your recent misfortunes, might offer the Duke some conversation. It would be the polite thing to do." "No? No?" Genevieve's voice rose just enough to draw more attention. "How interesting. I didn't realize the Vance family had become too proud for basic courtesy." The circle of nobles closed tighter. Alara recognized the formation, wolves cornering prey, ensuring no escape route remained. "I'm sure the Duke prefers solitude," Alara said carefully. "Perhaps. Or perhaps he's simply waiting for someone interesting enough to approach." Genevieve's eyes gleamed. "Unless you're afraid." "I'm not afraid." "Prove it." The challenge rang across the immediate vicinity like a bell. Conversations stuttered and died. Heads turned. Within seconds, half the ballroom was watching with the focused attention of spectators at a blood sport. "Sit beside him," Genevieve said clearly. "Have a conversation. Show us all that the Vance courage hasn't completely evaporated along with the Vance fortune." Alara's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. If she refused, she'd be branded a coward in front of 200 witnesses. The story would spread through every parlor and gentleman's club in the capital by morning. Her family's already precarious social position would collapse entirely. Her younger sister's marriage prospects, currently their only hope for financial recovery, would evaporate like morning dew. If she accepted, well, no one approached Duke Draven uninvited. No one sat at his table without express permission. No one interrupted his solitude without risking consequences that ranged from social annihilation to darker rumors Alara preferred not to consider. The man had fought in 3 border wars before he was 25. He'd inherited a dukedom on the brink of bankruptcy and transformed it into an economic fortress in less than a decade. He owned shipping companies, mining operations, and half the agricultural land in the Northern Territories. When he spoke in the House of Lords, legislation died or passed based solely on his word. And he had never, in 15 years of public life, been seen with a woman on his arm. The rumors about why ranged from tragic to terrifying. "Well?" Genevieve prompted, her voice honey-sweet. "Or should I tell your mother that you were too frightened to even attempt basic courtesy?" Alara's hands went cold. Her mother, who'd stopped sleeping after the financial collapse. Her mother, who'd aged a decade in 3 months. Her mother, who'd whispered last week that perhaps Alara should consider becoming a governess, or, the word had broken something in her voice, a paid companion to an elderly widow. Her younger sister Isla, who was 17 and lovely, and deserved better than watching her future crumble because their father had trusted the wrong people. Her father, whose health had deteriorated so rapidly, the doctors now spoke in careful euphemisms about stress and heart strain. The weight of 3 lives pressed down on Ilara's shoulders like iron chains. She looked across the ballroom at Duke Draven. He was watching her. The realization struck like lightning. Those cold, dark eyes had fixed on her with the absolute focus of a predator that had just noticed movement in the underbrush. He wasn't looking at Genevieve or the circle of nobles or the spectacle unfolding in his peripheral vision. He was looking directly at Alara, and in that gaze she saw recognition, not of her identity, but of the trap itself. He knew exactly what was happening. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it kindled something dangerous in her chest. A spark of fury that had been smoldering since the day her father came home with confession and ruin in his eyes. Genevieve wanted humiliation. The crowd wanted entertainment. Her family needed her to somehow, impossibly, navigate this without making everything worse. What did Alara want? She wanted to stop being prey. "All right," she heard herself say. Genevieve blinked. "What?" "I'll join the Duke for dinner." Alara's voice came out steady, calm, utterly devoid of the terror screaming through her veins. "Since you're all so concerned about his solitude." Shocked silence rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. "You're serious," Genevieve said slowly. "You dared me. I accepted." Alara smiled, the expression sharp enough to cut. "Unless you'd like to withdraw the challenge?" The trap reversed so quickly Genevieve nearly stumbled. If she backed down now, she'd look like a coward in front of the same audience she'd assembled to witness Alara's destruction. "By all means," Genevieve said, recovering with visible effort. "Do give the Duke our regards." Alara didn't wait for second thoughts to catch up with her courage. She walked. The crowd parted like water before a ship's prow. 200 pairs of eyes tracked her progress across the ballroom floor, her footsteps somehow audible despite the orchestra, despite the murmur of conversation, despite the roar of blood in her own ears. The high table loomed before her like a judge's bench. Duke Draven hadn't moved, hadn't looked away. He sat with the stillness of a cat watching a mouse decide whether to run or freeze. Alara reached the base of the raised platform and stopped. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, apologize to Genevieve, accept whatever humiliation came next. This was madness. This was social suicide. This was, "Your Grace," she said, her voice carrying just far enough. "Forgive the intrusion. Lady Margrave suggested I might join you for dinner if you're amenable to company." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Duke Draven regarded her with the expression of a man examining an unexpected chess move. Then, without breaking eye contact, he lifted one hand and gestured to the empty chair beside him. Alara's knees nearly buckled with relief, or terror. She couldn't tell which. She climbed the 3 steps to the high table with as much grace as she could summon and sat in the chair that moments ago had seemed as distant as the moon. The orchestrated resumed, conversation slowly, cautiously returned to the ballroom below, but Alara could feel the weight of 200 gazes boring into her back like hot needles. She'd done it. She'd accepted the dare, survived the approach, and now sat at the most dangerous table in the realm. Now she just had to survive dinner. Duke Draven picked up his wineglass and took a measured sip, his eyes never leaving her face. "That," he said quietly, his voice like gravel wrapped in silk, "was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've seen in years." Alara swallowed hard. "I'm still deciding which." Something flickered in his expression, not quite amusement, but close. "They sent you as entertainment," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "To humiliate you?" "Yes." "And you came anyway." Alara met his gaze, refusing to look away, despite every survival instinct screaming at her to submit, to lower her eyes, to acknowledge the vast and terrible gulf of power between them. "I came," she said quietly, "because being humiliated on my own terms is better than being destroyed on theirs." For the first time since she'd approached the table, Duke Draven's expression shifted. His eyes narrowed fractionally, and when he set down his wine glass, his movements carried the precision of a swordsman sheathing a blade. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elara Vance, Your Grace." Vance. He repeated it as if tasting the syllables. "The mining scandal." Heat flooded her cheeks. "My father made poor investments, yes." "He was defrauded," Draven corrected, "by men who've done the same to a dozen other families and will never face consequences because they have powerful friends." Elara stared at him. No one, absolutely no one, had framed her family's destruction that way. Every conversation, every pitying look, every whispered rumor had placed the blame squarely on her father's shoulders. Gullible, foolish, weak. "You sound certain," she said carefully. "I am, but—" Draven leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp as broken glass. "I've been tracking the syndicate responsible for 5 years. Your father was victim number 7. There will be an 8th unless someone stops them." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because—" He paused as a server approached with fresh wine, waited until the man retreated, then continued in a voice low enough that only Elara could hear. "You're not the first person Lady Margrave has used as a pawn in her petty power games, but you are the first one who walked into the trap with your eyes open and your spine straight." Elara's breath caught. "You knew this was a setup. The moment she started herding you across the room like a shepherdess with a particularly stupid lamb." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. "I've been waiting to see if you'd actually go through with it." A fury ignited in Elara's chest, hot and sudden. "This is amusing to you?" "No." The word cut through her anger like a knife. "This is instructive. I've spent the last hour watching the cream of our nation's aristocracy congratulate themselves on their superiority while contributing nothing of value to the world. Then you, disgraced, abandoned, with everything to lose, did something genuinely courageous." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "That interests me far more than anything else happening in this room." Elara didn't know what to say to that, didn't know what to do with the strange, intense focus radiating from the man beside her like heat from a forge. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. "What did you expect?" "A monster." "Ah." Duke Draven picked up his knife and cut into the untouched venison on his plate with surgical precision. "Well, the night is young. Despite everything, the fear, the scrutiny, the weight of social annihilation pressing down on her from all sides, Elara felt a laugh bubble up in her throat. She suppressed it, but Draven noticed. Of course he noticed. "You find that funny?" he asked. "I find," Elara said carefully, "that you're deliberately trying to frighten me, which is different from actually being frightening." His knife paused mid-cut. For 3 heartbeats, he was absolutely still. Then he laughed. It was a low, rough sound, unpracticed, as if he'd forgotten how, and it transformed his entire face. For just a moment, the marble cracked, and Elara glimpsed something underneath, something almost human. "You," he said, setting down the knife, "are going to be a problem." "I'm already a problem, Your Grace. Ask anyone." "I prefer Draven. Your Grace makes me feel like a cathedral." "Draven, then." Elara tested the name, found it fit. "May I ask you something?" "You may ask. I may not answer." "Why are you really here tonight?" His expression shuddered immediately, the warmth vanishing like a candle flame in a hurricane. When he spoke again, his voice carried the flat, dangerous tone of a man discussing business. "Lord Ashford owes me money, a substantial amount. He invited me here to negotiate terms." Draven's gaze swept across the ballroom below, lingering on clusters of nobles with the disdain of a general surveying cowards. "He thought the spectacle of his hospitality would soften my position. He was mistaken." "Will you ruin him?" "I will accept payment in full, with interest, by the date specified in our contract. If he cannot pay, I will seize assets equal to the debt. That's business, not ruin." Draven turned back to her. "Though I notice you didn't ask if he deserved it." "I've learned," Elara said quietly, "that what people deserve and what they receive rarely align." Something shifted in Draven's expression. A recognition, perhaps, or an acknowledgement of shared experience. Your family, he said. How bad is it? The question was so direct, so devoid of false sympathy, that Alara found herself answering honestly. We have 3 weeks before eviction. My mother's jewelry is gone. My sister had to leave her academy. My father... Her voice caught. My father is dying, though the doctors won't say it plainly. Stress, they claim. As if grief and shame were curable with tonics. And you? I'm trying to hold what's left together with willpower and spite. How's that working? Ask me in 3 weeks. Draven nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he already suspected. Then he did something that made Alara's heart stop. He stood. The entire ballroom went silent again, every conversation dying mid-sentence as 200 guests watched Duke Draven rise from his chair with deliberate, commanding grace. Alara froze, terrified she'd somehow offended him, said the wrong thing, crossed an invisible line. He extended his hand. Dance with me, he said. It wasn't a request. It wasn't quite a command. It was something in between, an offer that felt like a test, a challenge, and an escape route all at once. Alara stared at his outstretched hand as if it were a serpent. Below them, she could see Genevieve Margrave's expression shifting through shock, fury, and calculation at lightning speed. Around the room, nobles leaned toward each other, whispering frantically. Duke Cale Draven didn't dance. Everyone knew that. In 15 years of public appearances, he had never once stepped onto a ballroom floor with a woman. Until now. Alara placed her hand in his fingers closed around hers. Warm, strong, and utterly certain, and he led her down the steps to the main floor. The orchestra, sensing the moment with professional instinct, shifted seamlessly into a waltz. Draven guided her to the center of the ballroom, to the exact spot where every eye could see them, every whisper could dissect them, every judgment could land with maximum force. Then he pulled her into dance position, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers with the kind of practiced elegance that suggested extensive training and extensive disuse. Breathe, he said quietly. Alara realized she'd stopped. She inhaled shakily, acutely aware of the warmth of his hand through the thin fabric of her dress, the scent of cedar and steel that clung to him, the way every person in the room was watching them with expressions ranging from scandalized to envious. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Draven guided her through the opening steps of the waltz with flawless precision, his movements controlled but somehow making her look effortlessly graceful by comparison. Because, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, Lady Margrave and her circle sent you to me as a joke, a disposable pawn in their little game. I am returning you as a queen. Alara's breath caught. You're making me a target. I'm making you untouchable. His hand tightened fractionally at her waist. By tomorrow morning, every gossip in the capital will be speculating about why Duke Draven broke 15 years of solitude to dance with the disgraced Vance's daughter. They will wonder what I see in you, what plans I have, what power you might wield. I have no power. You will. He spun her through a turn, the movement sharp and commanding. Because I'm giving it to you, right now, in front of everyone. The music swelled around them, and Alara felt the weight of the moment settling onto her shoulders like a coronation mantle. This wasn't kindness. This was strategy. A calculated move in a game she barely understood, executed by a man who'd built an empire on reading human nature and exploiting weakness. But it was also, somehow, a gift. What do you want in return? She asked. Draven's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe, or satisfaction that she'd asked the right question. Nothing, he said. Tonight. The word hung between them, pregnant with implication. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, Miss Vance, you will receive a visitor, a solicitor carrying a business proposal. He guided her through another flawless turn. You will listen to what he has to say. If you're as clever as I think you are, you will accept. If you're not, he shrugged. You'll spend the rest of your life wondering what might have happened if you'd taken the risk. What kind of proposal? The kind that could save your family, or destroy you completely. Draven's smile was sharp as a blade, depending on whether you're brave enough to survive it. The waltz ended. Draven released her, stepped back and bowed, a gesture so formally correct it might have been mocking if not for the absolute sincerity in his execution. Alara curtsied in return, her mind spinning through implications and possibilities, trying to understand what had just happened and what was coming next. When she straightened, Draven was already walking away. He strode toward the ballroom's main doors with the ground-eating pace of a man who'd accomplished his objective and had no interest in lingering for the aftermath. Servants scrambled out of his path. Lord Ashford, red-faced and sweating, tried to intercept him near the entrance. Draven brushed past without slowing. Then he was gone, leaving behind a ballroom full of witnesses and a storm of speculation that would rage for weeks. Alara stood alone in the center of the dance floor, acutely aware of every stare, every whisper, every venomous glare from Genevieve Margrave's direction. But for the first time in 3 months, she didn't feel like prey. She felt dangerous. The carriage ride home felt like drowning in slow motion. Alara pressed her forehead against the cool glass window, watching the glittering lights of the Ashford estate fade into darkness behind her. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. The rented carriage, cheaper than the one that had brought her, smelling of mildew and someone else's perfume, rattled over cobblestones that seemed determined to shake her apart. She'd survived. Somehow, impossibly, she'd walked into the most dangerous social trap imaginable and emerged not just intact, but transformed. Duke Cale Draven had danced with her, in front of 200 witnesses. Tarwatska, the man who'd built his reputation on isolation and ruthlessness, had publicly claimed her as someone worth his attention. The implications were staggering and terrifying. By morning, every breakfast table in the capital would be dissecting that dance. Every parlor would be whispering theories. Every ambitious mother with an unmarried daughter would be seething with envy or plotting revenge. Alara had wanted to stop being prey. She'd succeeded. Now she was a target. The carriage lurched to a stop outside the townhouse her family had rented after selling their ancestral manor, a narrow, cramped building in a neighborhood that pretended to respectability while slowly surrendering to decay. 3 floors of faded wallpaper, creaking stairs, and furniture they'd salvaged from the estate sale. Home, if she could still call it that. Alara climbed the steps with exhausted care, her second-hand dress suddenly feeling heavy as armor. The front door opened before she could reach for the handle. Her mother stood in the doorway, a shawl wrapped around her nightgown, her face pale in the lamplight. Alara, Margaret Vance's voice cracked on the name. You're home. Thank the heavens you're home. Mother, I'm fine. But her mother was already pulling her inside, hands fluttering over Alara's shoulders and face as if checking for injury. Margaret Vance had been beautiful once, the kind of woman who commanded rooms with effortless grace. 3 months of catastrophe had carved that beauty into something fragile and desperate. We heard the most insane rumors, her mother said, steering her toward the cramped sitting room where a single lamp burned against the darkness. Mrs. Colbert's housemaid came by earlier. She'd heard from someone at the Ashford estate. Alara, please tell me it's not true. Alara's stomach clenched. News traveled faster than she'd anticipated. What did you hear? That you... Margaret's hands twisted in her shawl. That you approached Duke Draven uninvited. That you... She couldn't seem to finish the sentence. We danced, Alara said quietly. 1 waltz, that's all. Her mother sat down abruptly as if her legs had given out. Oh, Alara, what have you done? The question hit harder than any accusation, because the truth was, Alara had no idea what she'd done. She'd accepted a dare, survived a trap, and caught the attention of the most dangerous man in the realm. And tomorrow, apparently, she'd receive a business proposal that could save or destroy her family. I did what I had to, Alara said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Lady Margrave forced my hand. I couldn't refuse without making everything worse. So you threw yourself at Duke Draven instead? Her mother's voice rose. Do you have any idea what kind of man he is? The things people say are mostly lies, Alara interrupted. I spoke with him, Mother. He's not a monster. Then what is he? Alara thought of cold, dark eyes that saw too much, of a hand steady and certain at her waist, of a voice promising both salvation and danger in the same breath. I don't know yet, she admitted. A floorboard creaked overhead. Both women looked up as footsteps descended the stairs, light and quick. Isla appeared in the doorway, 17 years old and still sleep-rumpled, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. Where Alara had inherited their father's dark coloring and sharp features, Isla was all soft curves and gentle beauty, the kind of girl who inspired poetry and protection in equal measure. Is it true? Isla breathed, her eyes wide. Did Duke Draven really dance with you? Isla, go back to bed, Margaret said sharply. But everyone's talking about it. Jenny's brother works in the Duke's stables, and he said, I don't care what he said. This is not your concern. Isla's expression crumpled, and Alara felt a surge of protective fury. Her sister deserved better than this, better than watching her future crumble, better than servants' gossip in rented rooms. Yes, Alara said clearly, the Duke danced with me. And tomorrow, I'm meeting with his solicitor. Margaret's face went white. His solicitor? He has a business proposal. I don't know what it is yet, but Alara met her mother's gaze steadily. I'm going to hear it, whatever it is. Absolutely not. Mother, do you think I don't know what kind of proposals powerful men make to desperate young women? Margaret's voice shook with anger and fear. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for this family's mistakes. It's not a sacrifice if I choose it. You're 23 years old. You don't know what you're choosing. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Alara felt something crack inside her chest, all the pressure, all the fear, all the months of watching her family disintegrate while she stood by helpless. Then tell me, Mother, she said, her voice deadly quiet. What should I choose instead? Should I watch Father die from shame? Watch Isla become a governess because we can't afford her dowry? Watch you sell everything we have left until there's nothing but memories? Margaret flinched as if struck. I'm trying to protect you, she whispered. I don't need protection. I need options. Alara softened her tone, reaching for her mother's hand. Let me hear what the Duke's solicitor has to say. If it's shameful or dangerous, I'll refuse. But if there's even a chance it could help us, there's always a price, Alara. Always. Then I'll decide if I'm willing to pay it. Before her mother could respond, a knock echoed through the narrow house, sharp, official, entirely too loud for the late hour. All three women froze. Who would call it this time? Isla whispered. Alara's pulse kicked into a gallop. She crossed to the window and pulled aside the threadbare curtain just enough to peer outside. A carriage waited in the street. Not rented, not borrowed. A genuine, expensive, unmistakably aristocratic carriage with a coat of arms painted on the door in silver and black. Draven's crest. Oh no, Alara breathed. The knock came again, more insistent. Margaret stood on shaking legs. Don't answer it. But Alara was already moving toward the door. Whatever was happening, hiding wouldn't change it. She pulled the door open to find a man standing on the steps, middle-aged, impeccably dressed, holding a leather document case like a weapon. Miss Alara Vance? His voice was clipped professional. Yes? My name is Harrison Blackwell. I represent Duke Kyle Draven in all legal and financial matters. He glanced past her at Margaret and Isla, then back to Alara. His Grace requests your presence immediately. Alara's blood turned to ice. It's nearly midnight. I'm aware. The matter is urgent. What matter? Blackwell's expression didn't change. One best discussed in private. The carriage is waiting. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse. Respectable women didn't climb into carriages with strange men at midnight. They didn't answer summons from powerful dukes like servants responding to a bell. But Alara had stopped being respectable 3 months ago when her father's investments collapsed. Give me 5 minutes, she said. She closed the door before Blackwell could argue and turned to find her mother gripping the banister with white-knuckled hands. You are not going, Margaret said. I am. Alara, mother, please. Alara kept her voice calm even as her heart hammered against her ribs. If Duke Draven wanted to hurt me, he could have done it in front of 200 witnesses tonight. This is something else. You don't know that. No, but I'm going to find out. She squeezed her mother's hand once, quickly, then turned to Isla. If I'm not back by dawn, send word to Lady Ashford. She owes our family enough to at least ask questions. Isla nodded, her eyes huge and frightened. Alara grabbed her cloak from the hook by the door, wrapped it around her shoulders, and stepped into the night before courage could desert her. Blackwell waited beside the carriage, his expression unreadable. He opened the door without a word. Alara climbed inside, her hands clenched in her lap to hide their shaking. The interior was luxury incarnate: velvet seats, polished wood, brass fixtures that gleamed in the lamplight. The door closed with a definitive click, and the carriage lurched into motion. Blackwell sat across from her, arranging papers from his document case with methodical precision. "Where are we going?" Alara asked. "Draven House. The Duke's city residence." Of course. Alara swallowed hard, trying to project calm she absolutely did not feel. "May I ask why His Grace couldn't wait until morning?" "You may ask." Blackwell didn't look up from his papers. "But I'm not authorized to discuss the details. The Duke will explain himself." They rode in silence through darkened streets, the carriage wheels clattering over cobblestones. Alara watched the city transform around her, from shabby respectability to quiet elegance to the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Tall townhouses gave way to actual estates, each one set back behind iron gates and manicured gardens. Draven House rose before them like a fortress disguised as a residence. 4 stories of pale stone, classical columns, windows that reflected lamplight like watchful eyes. The gates swung open as they approached, and the carriage rolled up a circular drive to deposit Alara at the base of a marble staircase that probably cost more than her family's former manor. Blackwell led her through doors that opened silently, into an entrance hall that could have swallowed her current home twice over. Servants appeared from nowhere to take her cloak, their movements synchronized and silent. "This way, Miss Vance." Alara followed Blackwell down a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, through a door that opened into a library that stole her breath. Books. Thousands of them. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, rolling ladders, leather spines in every color. A fireplace large enough to roast a pig. Furniture that managed to be both expensive and comfortable. And standing by the windows, silhouetted against the night, was Duke Kyle Draven. He'd changed from his formal dinner attire into something simpler: dark trousers, a white shirt open at the collar, no jacket. The informality should have made him seem more human. Instead, it made him more dangerous. "Thank you, Blackwell," Draven said without turning. "That will be all." The solicitor bowed and withdrew, closing the door with a soft click. Alara stood in the center of the library, acutely aware of how small and out of place she must look, and waited. Draven finally turned to face her. In the firelight, his features seemed carved from shadow and stone. "You came," he said. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you'd be sensible enough to refuse a midnight summons from a man you barely know." He moved away from the window with the controlled grace of a predator in familiar territory. "I'm pleased you're not that sensible. Why am I here? Because what I'm about to offer you requires absolute discretion. And because—" He stopped a few feet away, close enough that Alara could see the faint scar along his jaw, the silver threading through his dark hair. "I need to know if you're brave or simply reckless. Does it matter which?" "Enormously." Draven gestured to a chair near the fireplace. "Sit, please. This will take some explanation." Alara sat, more because her legs were shaking than because he'd asked. Draven remained standing, one hand braced against the mantelpiece, his expression contemplative. "I told you at the banquet that I've been tracking the syndicate that defrauded your father," he began. "What I didn't tell you is that I've been planning to destroy them for 3 years. I have evidence, witnesses, financial records that prove a pattern of deliberate systematic theft from vulnerable families." Hope sparked in Alara's chest. "Then you can expose them. Bring charges." "I can do nothing of the sort." Draven's voice was flat. "The men behind the syndicate have connections that reach into the Crown's inner circle. Judges, ministers, members of parliament. If I move against them directly, they'll bury the evidence and ruin anyone who testified, including the families they've already destroyed." The hope died as quickly as it had kindled. "Then what's the point of gathering evidence?" "The point, Miss Vance, is leverage. I don't need to destroy them in court. I need to destroy them in society. Render them so toxic, so unmarriageable to power, that their connections abandon them rather than risk association." He turned to face her fully. "But that requires a campaign, a long, careful public campaign that positions me as a defender of the vulnerable and them as predators." Understanding began to dawn, cold and sharp. "You need a face for the vulnerable," Alara said slowly. Someone sympathetic. Someone who can stand beside you and make your crusade look noble instead of vindictive. Yes. Why me? Draven's smile was grim. Because your family's ruin was their most recent success. Because you have the breeding and education to navigate high society even without money. Because you walked into a ballroom full of wolves tonight and didn't flinch. He paused. And because you have nothing left to lose. The words should have stung. Instead, they felt like relief. Someone finally acknowledging the truth instead of dancing around it with false sympathy. What exactly are you proposing? Alara asked. A partnership, public and temporary. Draven began to pace, his movements precise. You become my fiancé. We announce an engagement. You appear at my side during social events, charity functions, political gatherings. We present a united front, the powerful duke who fights for justice and the brave young woman he's chosen to support. Alara's breath stopped. A fake engagement. Obviously. For how long? 6 months. Maybe less if the plan works faster than expected. He stopped pacing, his dark eyes fixed on her face. During that time, your family will be protected, your debts cleared, your sister's academy tuition paid, your father will receive the best medical care available. You'll have access to my resources, my influence, my protection. It was everything. More than everything. The lifeline she'd been praying for delivered in a single, impossible offer. And when it ends? She asked carefully. We stage a quiet separation. Irreconcilable differences. No scandal, no blame. I'll provide you with a settlement generous enough to ensure your family's security for years. Draven's expression was unreadable. You walk away with your reputation intact and your future secured. I get the social cover I need to dismantle the syndicate. Alara's mind raced through implications, searching for the trap she knew must exist. Men like Draven didn't offer charity. They made investments. What aren't you telling me? She asked. Something flickered in his expression, respect maybe, or satisfaction that she'd asked. This will be brutal, he said quietly. Every enemy I've made in 15 years will see you as a weakness to exploit. Every social climber will try to tear you down out of jealousy. The same people who mocked you tonight will sharpen their knives and aim for your throat. I'm already their target. Not like this. Tonight you were entertainment. If you accept my offer, you become a threat. He moved closer, his voice dropping. They will dig into every corner of your life. They will spread rumors. They will try to break you, humiliate you, drive you away. And you'll have to smile through it all while pretending to be madly in love with me. The last part landed like a physical blow. Alara hadn't considered that aspect. The performance required, the intimacy implied. How convincing does it need to be? She asked, her voice barely steady. Extremely. We'll need to be seen together constantly. Dinners, dances, theater performances. I'll need to visit your family home. You'll need to visit mine. There will be touching, nothing inappropriate, but enough to suggest genuine affection. Hands held, arms linked. Perhaps, he hesitated fractionally, the occasional kiss on the hand or cheek in public settings. Heat flooded Alara's face. I see. If that's unacceptable, no. The word came out sharper than she'd intended. I mean, it's fine, I understand, for the performance. Draven studied her for a long moment, and Alara had the uncomfortable sensation of being read like a book he'd already memorized. There's one more thing, he said. This only works if you maintain absolute discretion. No one can know the engagement is fake. Not your mother, not your sister, not your closest friend. If word leaks that this is strategy rather than romance, the entire plan collapses. Alara's heart sank. Lying to her family, convincing them she'd somehow captured the heart of the realm's most eligible bachelor, felt like a betrayal worse than the deception itself. But what choice did she have? I understand, she said. Then do you accept? The question hung between them, weighted with the future. Alara thought of her father's deteriorating health, her mother's exhausted desperation, her sister's stolen dreams. She thought of 3 weeks until eviction, of a lifetime as a paid companion, or worse, of watching everything she loved crumble while she stood by helpless. She thought of cold, dark eyes that had seen through a trap and chosen to intervene, of a hand extended in a ballroom full of enemies, of a man who'd spent 3 years gathering evidence against predators no one else would touch. Yes, Alara said. I accept. Draven's expression didn't change, but something in his posture relaxed fractionally. Tension she hadn't realized he was carrying. Then we have an agreement. He crossed to a desk in the corner and returned with a document. This is a contract outlining the terms we've discussed. Read it carefully. If anything is unclear or unacceptable, tell me now. Alara took the papers with shaking hands and began to read. The language was formal but clear. 6 months of public engagement. Financial support for her family, including medical care, debt clearance, and living expenses. A settlement of £10,000 upon termination of the agreement. Confidentiality clauses that made her head spin with their severity. And at the bottom, 2 signature lines. This is legal? She asked. As legal as any business contract, though we'll file it under attorney-client privilege to maintain discretion. Draven handed her a pen. If you're satisfied with the terms, sign at the bottom. Alara stared at the blank line where her name would go. This was insane. She was agreeing to deceive her family, the entire aristocracy, potentially the crown itself. She was binding herself to a man she'd known for less than 4 hours, trusting that he'd keep his word when the performance ended. But she was also choosing salvation over surrender, action over helplessness, a dangerous alliance over slow, inevitable destruction. She signed her name in firm, clear strokes. Draven took the document, signed his own name below hers, and set the pen aside. Then it's done, he said. As of this moment, you are my fiancée. The words settled over Alara like a mantle, heavy, foreign, impossible to ignore. What happens now? She asked. Now I take you home. Tomorrow morning, I'll visit your family to formally request permission to court you, a courtesy, since the decision is already made. Tomorrow afternoon, we'll make our first public appearance together at Lady Thornwood's garden party. His mouth curved in something that might have been amusement. And tomorrow night, the engagement announcement will appear in the society papers. Alara's head spun. That's very fast. Speed prevents questions. If we court for months, people will scrutinize every interaction. If we appear to have been struck by sudden, overwhelming passion, he shrugged. They'll gossip, but they'll accept it. The heart wants what it wants, after all. The heart, Alara repeated faintly. Draven's expression softened almost imperceptibly. This will work, Miss Vance, but only if you trust me. Can you do that? It was the first time he'd asked, rather than stated. The first hint of uncertainty she'd seen in his armor. Alara thought of everything she was gambling, everything she stood to lose if this was a trap, a game, a cruelty disguised as rescue. Then she thought of the alternative. Yes, she said, I can trust you. Good. Draven moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. One more thing. When we're alone, call me Kael. If you're going to convince society you're in love with me, you should probably stop addressing me like a cathedral. Despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the sheer insanity of what she'd just agreed to, Alara felt a laugh escape. Kael, then, she said. He smiled, a real smile this time, not the sharp blade he showed the world. Welcome to the partnership, Alara. The carriage delivered her home an hour before dawn. Alara climbed the steps to find her mother waiting in the sitting room, still awake, still terrified. Where were you? Margaret demanded. Alara took a deep breath and prepared to deliver the first of many lies. Mother, she said carefully, I need to tell you something. Duke Draven has asked to court me, formally. The color drained from Margaret's face. What? He's coming tomorrow morning to speak with Father. He wants... Alara forced herself to meet her mother's eyes. He wants permission to pursue an engagement. Margaret stood slowly, her expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and something close to horror. Alara, she whispered, what have you done? And in that moment, staring at her mother's devastated face, Alara realized the full weight of the deception she'd agreed to carry. She'd signed a contract to save her family. Now she had to convince them she'd sold her heart instead. The morning sun turned the sitting room into an interrogation chamber. Alara sat across from her mother, watching Margaret Vance's face cycle through expressions like a storm-gathering force. Behind them, Isla hovered in the doorway, her eyes wide with something between wonder and terror. Say that again, Margaret said, her voice dangerously quiet. Slowly, Duke Draven has asked to court me. Alara kept her hands folded in her lap, willing them not to shake. He'll be here within the hour to speak with Father formally. Within the hour? Her mother's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. How convenient! How perfectly orchestrated! Tell me, Alara, when exactly did this courtship begin? Before or after you threw yourself at him last night? The accusation hit like a slap. Alara forced herself to breathe, to remember the story she and Kael had constructed during the carriage ride home. Simple. Plausible. Impossible to disprove. It began last night, she said carefully, when we danced, when we spoke. Mother, he's not what people say. He's exactly what people say. Margaret stood abruptly, pacing the narrow room like a caged animal. Ruthless, calculating, a man who builds empires by crushing anyone in his path. And you think he suddenly developed tender feelings for a disgraced girl he met at a party? Why is that so impossible to believe? Because men like Duke Draven don't fall in love, Alara. They acquire assets. Her mother spun to face her, and there were tears in her eyes now, hot and furious. What did he offer you? Money? Protection? A way out of our circumstances? The lies stuck in Alara's throat like broken glass. She wanted to tell the truth, wanted to explain the contract, the strategy, the 6-month performance that would save them all. But Kael's warning echoed in her mind. No one can know. If word leaks, the entire plan collapses. He offered me a choice, Alara said instead, meeting her mother's gaze. And I chose to accept his courtship. That's all. That's not all. It's never all with men like him. Margaret sank back into her chair, suddenly looking older than her 47 years. Oh, Alara, what have you traded away? Before Alara could answer, footsteps sounded on the stairs, heavy, uneven, accompanied by a rattling cough that made both women flinch. Charles Vance appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on a walking stick he'd needed for only a month, but that already seemed part of his body. He'd been a robust man once, broad-shouldered and commanding. Now he was a ghost of that strength, his face gaunt, his eyes shadowed with the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. "What's this about Duke Draven?" he asked, his voice rough from the coughing fit. Alara stood quickly, moving to help him to a chair. He waved her off with the irritation of a man who hated acknowledging weakness. "Father, please sit. I have something to tell you." Charles lowered himself into the chair with careful dignity and fixed her with the look that had once made business partners and servants alike scramble to obey. 3 months of ruin hadn't entirely erased the man he'd been. "I'm listening," he said. Alara told the story again, watching her father's expression shift from confusion to disbelief to something harder to read. When she finished, silence stretched through the room like a taut wire. "The Duke is coming here," Charles said finally. "To this house." "Yes." "To ask my permission to court my daughter." "Yes." Her father's laugh was bitter and broken. "The irony is exquisite. A month ago, I would have thrown him out for the presumption. Now," he gestured at the shabby room, the water stain on the ceiling, the furniture they'd salvaged from the estate sale. "Now, I should probably be grateful he's willing to set foot in this place at all." "Charles," Margaret said sharply, "it's true, isn't it? We're destitute. Our daughter is unmarriageable by conventional standards. If Duke Draven wants her, we should count ourselves fortunate rather than suspicious." He turned back to Alara, and something in his eyes made her chest ache. "Is this what you want, Alara? Truly?" The question was gentle, almost tender. It would have been easier if he'd raged or forbidden it outright. Instead, he was asking if she'd chosen this willingly, giving her the dignity of choice, even when they both knew she had none. "Yes," Alara lied, hating herself for it. "It's what I want." Charles studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then I'll receive him when he arrives. And if his intentions are honorable, he'll have my blessing." "And if they're not?" Margaret demanded. "Then I'm a dying man with nothing left to lose," Charles said quietly. "And Duke Draven will discover that even ruins can still bite." A knock sounded at the door, sharp, precise, exactly on time. Alara's heart kicked into a gallop. She moved to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to see a carriage in the street. Not the one from last night. This was smaller, less ostentatious, painted a dark blue that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. Cale stepped out looking every inch the aristocrat. Impeccably tailored coat, polished boots, an expression of calm authority that made the shabby street around him seem like a stage set rather than the decay it actually was. "He's here," Alara breathed. Margaret made a sound somewhere between a sob and a curse. Isla darted forward to peer through the window, then gasped. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "He's dangerous," Margaret corrected. Charles pushed himself to his feet with visible effort. "Then let's see which one matters more." The knock came again. Alara smoothed her dress, the same one from last night, hastily cleaned and pressed, and moved toward the door before anyone could stop her. She opened it to find Kael standing on the narrow stoop, holding a bouquet of white roses that must have cost more than their month's rent. Up close, in daylight, he looked different, softer somehow, though no less commanding. His dark eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice formal and correct. "I hope I'm not calling at an inconvenient hour." "Not at all, Your Grace." The words felt foreign in her mouth, too stiff, too practiced. "Please, come in." Kael stepped across the threshold, and suddenly the cramped entryway seemed even smaller. His presence filled the space like smoke, impossible to ignore. He handed her the roses with a slight bow, and Alara caught the faintest whisper as he straightened. "Breathe. You're doing fine." The words steadied her more than they should have. She led him into the sitting room where her family waited like prisoners facing judgment. Charles stood by the fireplace, leaning on his walking stick, but still managing to project authority. Margaret sat rigid as a statue, her hands clenched in her lap. Isla hovered near the doorway, her eyes huge. "Mr. Vance," Kael said, moving forward with his hand extended. "Thank you for receiving me on such short notice." Charles shook his hand, and Alara watched some silent assessment pass between them. Two men measuring each other according to rules she only half understood. "Duke Draven," her father said, "you'll forgive me if I'm direct. My health doesn't permit long conversations." "I appreciate directness." Kael's tone was respectful without being deferential. "I've come to request permission to court your daughter. I realize this is sudden. I realize our acquaintance is brief. But I believe—" He paused, and when his gaze found Alara's, something in his expression shifted. "I believe I've found something rare. Someone worth pursuing." The words should have sounded rehearsed. Instead, they carried a weight that made Alara's throat tighten. "My daughter is not a business opportunity," Charles said quietly. "No, she's far more valuable than that." Kael's voice hardened fractionally. "I watched her walk into a trap last night with more courage than most men show on battlefields. I spoke with her and found intelligence, wit, and a refusal to surrender even when everything rational said she should. Those qualities are rare. They deserve respect, protection, partnership." Margaret made a soft sound of distress. Charles's expression remained unreadable. "Pretty words," he said. "But words are cheap, Duke Draven. What are your intentions?" "To court your daughter properly. To offer her the life she deserves rather than the one circumstances have forced upon her. And if she'll accept me—" Kael's gaze never left Alara's father. "To marry her. To build a future together based on mutual respect and shared purpose." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret stood abruptly. "May I speak with you privately, Duke Draven?" "Mother," Alara started. "It's all right." Kael inclined his head. "Of course, Mrs. Vance." Margaret led him into the narrow hallway, closing the door behind them with a decisive click. Alara strained to hear, but their voices were too low, too careful. "What do you think?" Isla whispered, moving closer. "I think," Charles said slowly, "that Duke Draven is either the answer to our prayers or the worst mistake we've ever made." "Which one do you believe?" Alara asked. Her father looked at her with eyes that had seen too much ruin. "I believe you walked into his orbit knowing exactly what you were doing, and I believe you'll survive whatever comes next. You're stronger than you think, Alara." The words lodged in her chest like thorns, because she wasn't strong. She was terrified. She was lying to everyone she loved. She was bound by contract to a man whose motives she only half understood. But she couldn't tell them that. So she smiled and pretended the weight crushing her lungs was confidence instead of dread. The hallway door opened. Margaret emerged looking pale and shaken, followed by Kael, whose expression revealed nothing. "Charles," Margaret said, her voice tight. "A word, please." Alara's father moved slowly into the hallway. The door closed again. Kael crossed the room to stand beside Alara, his movements casual, but his proximity deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. "Your mother is more perceptive than I expected." Alara's blood went cold. "What did she say?" "She asked if I was using you, if this was strategy disguised as romance." His mouth curved slightly. "I told her the truth, that I see value in you the rest of society is too blind to recognize, that I'm pursuing you because you're extraordinary, not despite your circumstances." "And she believed you?" "She wants to believe me." "There's a difference." Hale's hand brushed hers, barely a touch, gone in a heartbeat. "But she's watching. They all are. Remember that." The door opened again. Charles and Margaret returned, their expressions carefully neutral. "Duke Draven," Charles said, "you have my permission to court my daughter, with one condition." "Name it." "If your intentions change, if you decide this courtship isn't what you want, you will tell us immediately and withdraw honorably. No scandal, no whispers. You will protect her reputation even if the relationship ends." It was a father's last desperate attempt at control, a way to salvage dignity from disaster if everything collapsed. Kael met Charles's gaze steadily. "You have my word." "Then we're agreed." Charles extended his hand again, and they shook like men sealing a business arrangement. Because that's exactly what it was. The rest of the visit passed in careful pleasantries. Tea was served in chipped cups that had once been part of a full service. Conversation touched on neutral topics: the weather, the upcoming season, mutual acquaintances. Isla asked breathless questions about Draven House that made Margaret wince. Kael answered with patience that seemed almost genuine. And through it all, Ilara sat and smiled and played the role of the smitten young woman while her stomach churned with guilt. When Kael finally stood to leave, he turned to Ilara with a slight bow. "Miss Vance, would you walk me to my carriage?" It wasn't really a question. Ilara rose and followed him outside, acutely aware of her mother watching through the window. The morning had turned bright and clear, the kind of spring day that promised renewal. Kael stopped beside his carriage and turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Well done," he said quietly. "You were perfect. I lied to my entire family. You protected them. There's a difference." His hand found hers, and this time the touch lingered. "Listen to me, Ilara. What we're doing, it's necessary. But it's also dangerous. From this moment forward, you're walking a tightrope. One slip, one contradiction, one moment of weakness, and everything collapses." "I know." "Do you?" His grip tightened fractionally. "Because in 3 hours, we're attending Lady Thornwood's garden party. Every major family in the capital will be there. Every enemy I've made, every social climber looking for weakness. They're going to circle you like sharks, and you're going to smile and convince them you're madly in love with me." Fear coiled in Ilara's stomach, cold and sharp. "What if I can't?" "You will, because the alternative is watching your father die in a debtor's hospital and your sister become a governess." Kael's voice was gentle but implacable. "This is war, Ilara. Social war, but war nonetheless. And in war, you don't get the luxury of fear." "That's easy for you to say. You've been fighting this kind of battle your whole life." "Yes, I have." Something flickered in his eyes, old pain, carefully buried. "Which is why I know you can survive it. You're stronger than you realize." Before Ilara could respond, he lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Light, formal, the gesture of a courtier rather than a lover. But the contact sent heat racing up her arm. 3 hours, he said. "I'll send a carriage. Wear something that makes you feel powerful." Then he was gone, climbing into his carriage with efficient grace, leaving Ilara standing on the street with her hands still tingling where his lips had touched. She turned to find Isla watching from the doorway, her expression unreadable. "He looks at you," her sister said quietly, "like you're the only person in the world." Alara's throat closed, because Kael didn't look at her that way at all. He looked at her like a chess piece he was moving across a board. Valuable, strategic, but ultimately replaceable. "It's new," she managed. "We barely know each other." "Then why does it feel like he's known you forever?" "Because he was a master manipulator. Because he'd built an empire on reading people and exploiting their weaknesses. Because this was all performance, and he was better at it than she'd ever be." "I don't know," Alara said, the lie settling into her bones like frost. "I don't know anything anymore." Lady Thornwood's estate was a monument to excess disguised as taste. Alara stepped out of Kael's carriage, the formal one this time, with his crest painted bold on the door, and stared up at a house that could have swallowed her family's former manor 3 times over. White stone gleamed in the afternoon sun. Gardens stretched in geometric perfection toward a distant hedge maze. Guests in spring pastels dotted the lawn like expensive flowers. "Ready?" Kael appeared at her elbow, offering his arm. Alara looked down at herself. The dress had arrived that morning in a box tied with silk ribbon, pale blue silk that fit her perfectly, embroidered with silver thread that caught the light. It must have cost a fortune. She'd stared at it for 10 minutes before Isla convinced her to put it on. "I feel like an imposter," she admitted. "Good. So does everyone else here. They're just better at hiding it." Kael's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "Remember what we discussed. Confidence, composure. If someone says something cruel, smile and change the subject. If someone asks about our courtship, keep it vague but warm. And if anyone makes you genuinely uncomfortable, you'll handle it. I'll destroy them." His voice was casual, but the promise underneath was steel. Thoroughly and publicly. They walked through gardens that probably employed 20 gardeners toward a crowd that parted like the sea before Moses. Conversations stuttered and died. Heads turned. A woman in a violet dress actually dropped her teacup, the porcelain shattering on the stone path. Alara kept her chin high and her expression serene, pretending she couldn't feel 200 pairs of eyes dissecting her like a specimen under glass. Lady Thornwood swept toward them, 60 years old and radiating the kind of authority that came from 3 decades of hosting the capital's most influential gatherings. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were calculating. "Duke Draven," she said, offering her hand. "What a delightful surprise. We weren't certain you'd attend." "Lady Thornwood." Kael bowed over her hand with impeccable courtesy. "May I present Miss Alara Vance?" The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Lady Thornwood's smile fixed in place like a mask as she turned to Alara. "Miss Vance, how unexpected to see you here." Translation: "How dare you show your disgraced face at my party?" "Lady Thornwood," Alara said, matching her smile, "thank you for your hospitality. Your gardens are magnificent." "Yes, well, some things maintain their beauty despite changes in circumstance." The barb landed with surgical precision. "I trust your family as well?" "As well as can be expected," Alara replied, refusing to flinch. "We appreciate the kindness of friends during difficult times." "Friends?" Lady Thornwood's eyes gleamed. "Yes, one does discover who their true friends are when fortune shifts, doesn't one?" Kael's hand tightened on Alara's, a warning to stay calm. "Indeed," he said smoothly, "which is why I value Miss Vance's company so highly. She has the rare quality of remaining genuine regardless of her audience." The implication was clear. Unlike everyone else here. Lady Thornwood's smile turned brittle. "How fortunate for you both. Do enjoy the refreshments. The champagne is particularly fine this year." She swept away, leaving a wake of whispers. "That went well," Kael murmured. "She hates me." "She hates everyone. Don't take it personally." He steered her toward a group clustered near the fountain. "Now comes the difficult part. Socializing." The afternoon became an endurance test. Every conversation was a minefield. Every smile hid calculation. Women who'd once invited Alara to tea now looked through her as if she were made of glass. Men who'd courted her sister now smirked as if her presence proved some private theory about fallen women. And through it all, Kael remained at her side, steady, implacable, deflecting cruelty with the precision of a swordsman. Miss Vance, Lord Ashford's nephew, approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I heard the most fascinating rumor. Is it true you and Duke Draven are courting? Cale finished, his tone pleasant, but edged with warning. Yes. I'm surprised the news is already circulating, but I suppose nothing stays secret long in this city. Courting. The nephew's gaze traveled over Alara with insulting slowness. How remarkably generous of you, Your Grace, to overlook her family's difficulties. I don't overlook anything, Kyle said quietly. I simply value different qualities than you do. Intelligence, for instance. Courage. Integrity. Miss Vance possesses all three. Can you say the same? The nephew's face flushed red. He opened his mouth, then seemed to think better of it, and retreated. Alara's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her skirt to hide the tremor. That was, she started. Nothing, Cale interrupted. That was nothing compared to what's coming. Look. He nodded toward the garden entrance where a new group was arriving. Alara's stomach dropped. Genevieve Margrave swept across the lawn in emerald silk, flanked by her usual entourage of sycophants. She looked like a general leading troops into battle, her expression radiating predatory satisfaction. She'd come to destroy Alara in front of everyone. Stay close, Kyle said, his voice dropping to a tone Alara had never heard before. Cold, deadly, absolutely certain. And trust me. Genevieve approached with a smile bright as shattered glass. Duke Draven, Miss Vance, how cozy you've become. Lady Margrave. Cale's greeting was perfectly polite. Lovely to see you. Is it? Genevieve's gaze fixed on Alara like a cat watching a mouse. I must say, Alara, you've surprised us all. When I dared you to approach the Duke last night, I never imagined you'd take it so literally. Shocked silence rippled through the nearby guests. Alara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Genevieve had just told everyone, in front of witnesses, that the dance, the courtship, everything was the result of a dare. That Alara had thrown herself at Kyle out of desperation, not desire. A dare, Cale repeated, his voice dangerously soft. Oh yes? Genevieve's smile widened. Didn't Alara tell you? It was all rather amusing. We thought she'd be too frightened to actually go through with it, but she gestured at them. Here we are. The crowd leaned in, hungry for blood. Alara's mind raced, searching for a response that wouldn't make everything worse. But before she could speak, Kyle laughed. It was a genuine sound, warm and amused, completely at odds with the tension crackling through the air. How fortunate for me, he said, his eyes glittering with something dangerous, that you're so predictable, Lady Margrave. Genevieve blinked. Excuse me? Did you really think I didn't know about your little game? Cale's smile was sharp enough to cut. I watched you herd Miss Vance across the ballroom like a shepherdess with a lamb. I saw the trap you'd set, and I waited to see if she'd have the courage to walk into it. Genevieve's expression flickered, the first crack in her armor. You knew, she said slowly. Of course I knew. I've been watching your petty cruelties for years, Genevieve. You target the vulnerable and call it entertainment. You destroy reputations for sport. You're exactly the kind of predator I've dedicated my career to eliminating. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire garden. So yes, I knew about your dare, and I chose to dance with Miss Vance anyway. Not because she approached me, but because watching her choose courage over humiliation was the only genuine thing I'd seen all evening. The words landed like artillery strikes. Genevieve's face went white, then red, cycling through fury and mortification. You're making a mistake, she hissed. She's using you. No. Cale's voice cut through her protest like a blade. You tried to use her. You failed. And now you're discovering what happens when your games collide with someone who refuses to play. He turned to Alara, and the hardness in his expression melted into something softer. Shall we find that champagne? He asked, offering his arm. Alara took it with trembling hands, and they walked away, leaving Genevieve Margrave standing alone in a circle of witnesses who'd just watched her social execution. As soon as they were out of earshot, Alara's legs nearly gave out. Cale guided her to a stone bench hidden behind a rose trellis and pressed a glass of champagne into her hands. Drink. he ordered. She obeyed, the bubbles harsh against her throat. That was necessary. Cale sat beside her, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. Genevieve made her move. I countered. Now everyone knows that attacking you means attacking me, and no one in that garden is stupid enough to make me an enemy. She'll try again. Let her. Each time she does, I'll destroy another piece of her influence. Eventually, she'll learn. Or she won't, and she'll find herself completely isolated. He took the glass from her hands and set it aside. How are you holding up? Terrified, Ilara admitted. Everyone's watching. Everyone's judging. I can feel them picking apart every word, every gesture, trying to figure out if this is real. Good. Let them wonder. Uncertainty is more powerful than certainty. As long as they're not sure what we are, they can't effectively attack it. Cale's hand found hers, his fingers threading through hers with shocking intimacy. But we need to give them something concrete, something that settles the question. Ilara's pulse kicked into a gallop. What do you mean? I mean, Cale said quietly, turning to face her, that I'm going to kiss you, right here in view of everyone, and you're going to let me. Because tomorrow morning, the engagement announcement runs in the society papers, and this, he gestured at the garden, the guests, the watching eyes. This needs to look real. Ilara's breath stopped. They'd discussed public affection in theory, hands held, arms linked, nothing improper. This was different. We don't have to, Cale added, and something in his voice shifted, a gentleness she hadn't expected. If you're not ready, we'll find another way. But it would make this easier, more convincing. Ilara thought of her father's medical bills, her sister's future, the 3 weeks they'd had before eviction, the contract she'd signed in the middle of the night, binding her to 6 months of performance. All right, she whispered. Do it. Cale studied her face for a long moment, as if memorizing every detail. Then his hand came up to cup her jaw, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with shocking tenderness. Close your eyes, he murmured, and breathe. Ilara obeyed. She felt him lean in, felt the warmth of his breath against her lips, felt the moment stretch and bend. His mouth brushed hers, soft and careful, a question more than a demand. Ilara's entire world narrowed to that single point of contact. The garden, the guests, the performance, all of it vanished beneath the overwhelming sensation of Cale's lips moving against hers with devastating gentleness. It lasted 3 heartbeats, maybe 4. Then he pulled back, his eyes dark and unreadable. Perfect, he said quietly. Ilara couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the fact that her first kiss, the first time anyone had touched her like that, was a calculated strategy in a war she barely understood, and it had felt real. Applause erupted from somewhere in the garden. Ilara jerked back to awareness to find dozens of guests watching, some smiling, some scowling, all of them witnessing the moment that would be dissected in every parlor for weeks. Come, Cale said, standing and offering his hand. Let's give them something else to talk about. They rejoined the party, and this time the whispers were different. Speculation, envy, grudging acknowledgement. Ilara could feel the shift like a change in atmospheric pressure. She'd gone from prey to puzzle in a single afternoon. But as the sun began to set and Cale guided her back toward the carriage, Ilara realized something terrifying. The performance was working, too well. Because when Cale handed her into the carriage and his fingers lingered on hers just a heartbeat too long, she felt her pulse jump. Not from fear or strategy, but from something far more dangerous. And when the carriage pulled away from Lady Thornwood's estate, leaving the watching crowds behind, Ilara sat in silence and wondered what happened when the line between performance and reality started to blur. The carriage wheels rattled over cobblestones while Ilara sat in silence, her fingers pressed to her lips as if she could still feel the ghost of Cale's kiss burning there. Across from her, Cale studied a stack of papers his secretary had delivered to the carriage, his expression carved from stone. He might have been reviewing shipping manifests or crop reports for all the emotion he displayed. As if kissing her in front of 100 witnesses had been nothing more than signing a contract, which, Ilara reminded herself bitterly, was exactly what it had been. Stop, Cale said without looking up. Alara blinked. What? Whatever you're thinking right now, stop. He set the papers aside and met her gaze with unsettling directness. I can see you spiraling from here. I'm not. You're questioning everything, wondering if the kiss was real, if any of this is real, if I'm manipulating you. His mouth curved slightly. Am I close? Alara's cheeks burned. You're very certain of yourself. I'm observant. There's a difference. Kael leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, bringing him closer to her space. Listen to me carefully, Alara. What happened today at the garden party, that was necessary theater. The kiss, the public claim, the humiliation of Genevieve Margrave. All of it served the purpose we agreed to. I know that. Do you? Because you look like someone who just realized she's drowning and can't find the surface. His voice softened fractionally. This partnership only works if you trust the strategy. If you start doubting every gesture, every word, you'll make mistakes. And mistakes get people killed. The last word landed with shocking weight. Killed? Alara repeated. This is social warfare, not... Don't be naive. Kael's expression hardened. The syndicate we're targeting has destroyed 7 families. 3 of those families lost more than their fortunes. Lord Ashford's business partner died in a riding accident that was anything but accidental. The Harcourt daughter developed a sudden illness that left her bedridden for months. The Westmore son disappeared entirely and was found 3 weeks later in a dockside tavern with no memory of his name. Ice flooded Alara's veins. You're saying they murder people? I'm saying they eliminate obstacles, and if they perceive you as a threat to their operations, Kael's gaze never wavered. They will eliminate you too, which is why this performance must be flawless, why you can't afford doubt or hesitation. Why I kissed you today in full view of everyone, so they'd see you as mine and untouchable rather than vulnerable and alone. The words should have terrified her. Instead, they sparked fury. I'm not a possession, Alara said quietly. No, you're a partner. But to the predators watching, you need to appear as an extension of my power. Because that power is the only thing keeping you alive right now. Kael sat back, and something in his expression shifted. Regret, maybe, or exhaustion. I'm sorry if that's brutal, but you deserve the truth more than you deserve comfort. Alara stared at him, trying to reconcile the man who'd kissed her with devastating tenderness against the strategist who spoke of murder as casually as discussing the weather. How do you live like this? She asked. Always calculating, always performing, never trusting anyone. Practice. The answer was flat, emotionless. A necessity. The world I operate in doesn't reward vulnerability, Alara. It rewards strength, control, the ability to see 3 moves ahead and execute without hesitation. That sounds exhausting. It is. For just a moment, something almost human flickered across his face. But it keeps people safe, my tenants, my staff, my business partners. And now, his eyes met hers. You. The carriage slowed, and Alara realized with a jolt that they'd arrived at her family's townhouse. The narrow street looked even shabbier in the dying light, the peeling paint and cracked cobblestones a stark contrast to the luxury she'd just left. Kael climbed out first and offered his hand to help her down. When her feet touched the ground, he didn't immediately release her. Tomorrow, he said quietly, the engagement announcement runs in every major paper. By noon, you'll receive more invitations than you can possibly accept. Dinner parties, theater events, charity galas. Every hostess in the capital will want the Duke's new fiancée at their table. Fiancée, Alara repeated, the word feeling foreign. When did we decide on engagement instead of courtship? About 30 seconds after I kissed you. Kael's smile was sharp. Courtship is tentative, easily broken. Engagement is a declaration of intent. It makes you harder to attack and easier to protect. You didn't think to ask me first? Would you have said no? Alara opened her mouth, then closed it. Because he was right. She'd signed a contract for 6 months. Whether they called it courtship or engagement changed nothing about the fundamental transaction. The announcement will include details about the wedding, Kael continued, as if he hadn't just casually mentioned marriage. Set for early autumn, 3 months from now. Lara's breath stopped. We're actually getting married? No, the engagement will quietly dissolve in 6 weeks when I discover evidence that you— He paused, choosing words carefully. Cannot provide the partnership I require. Irreconcilable differences, mutual decision, no scandal. But the announcement creates urgency, forces people to react now rather than waiting to see how things develop. It draws out anyone planning to interfere. Kale released her hand finally, stepping back. Get some rest. Tomorrow starts the real work. He climbed back into the carriage and was gone before Alara could formulate a response, leaving her standing on the street with the weight of the word fiancé settling onto her shoulders like a crown made of thorns. The front door opened before she reached it. Isla stood in the doorway, her eyes enormous. Everyone's talking about you, she said. Everyone? Mrs. Harrington's maid came by with gossip. Lady Pemberton's footman delivered flowers with a note. Even the butcher asked Mother if the rumors were true. Alara stepped inside, exhaustion crashing over her in waves. What rumors? That Duke Draven kissed you, in public, at Lady Thornwood's garden party in front of half the aristocracy. Isla grabbed her hands, practically vibrating with excitement. Is it true? Did he really? Yes. Alara pulled away gently, removing her gloves with mechanical precision. He kissed me. It was— The lie formed before she could stop it. Wonderful. Isla squealed, the sound piercing in the narrow hallway. I can't believe it. 3 days ago you were invisible. Now you're engaged to the most powerful man in the realm. I'm not— Alara started, then remembered. Tomorrow's announcement. 3 months until a wedding that would never happen. Not sure I believe it myself. Margaret appeared in the sitting room doorway, her expression unreadable. Isla, go help your father upstairs. He's had a difficult day. Isla's smile faded, but she obeyed, disappearing up the stairs with reluctant steps. Margaret waited until the footsteps faded before speaking. A courier arrived an hour ago, from Duke Draven's solicitor. She held out an envelope, heavy paper, sealed with wax bearing Kael's crest. Alara broke the seal with trembling fingers and unfolded the single sheet inside. The message was brief, written in precise legal script. Per the agreement between Duke Kael Draven and Miss Alara Vance, the following arrangements have been finalized. Payment of all outstanding debts belonging to the Vance family. Reinstatement of Miss Isla Vance at Madame Crestwood's Academy with full tuition covered. Medical care for Mr. Charles Vance through Dr. Harrison Blackwell, specialist in cardiac conditions. Monthly allowance for household expenses delivered on the 1st of each month. These arrangements are effective immediately and will continue for the duration specified in the contract. At the bottom, Kael's signature, bold and certain. What contract? Margaret asked quietly. Alara's throat closed. The lies were multiplying, each one building on the last until she could barely remember what truth looked like. The marriage contract, she managed. Kael wanted to ensure the family would be provided for before we formalize our engagement. Engagement, Margaret's voice cracked on the word. Alara, this is happening so fast, too fast. Yesterday you were invisible. Today you're engaged to a man you barely know. I know him well enough. Do you? Do you know why he's never courted anyone before? Why women whisper about him like he's cursed? Why his own peers keep their distance? Margaret crossed the room, gripping Alara's shoulders. There are stories, Alara, terrible stories about what happened to his first— His first what? Alara demanded when her mother broke off. Margaret's face went pale. Nothing. Forget I said anything. Mother, I'm trying to protect you. The words burst out like a dam breaking. I'm trying to understand why a man like Duke Draven would suddenly fixate on my daughter. And all I can think is that you're not telling me something, that there's a piece of this puzzle I'm not seeing. Alara wanted to confess everything. The dare, the trap, the midnight summons, the contract signed in a library that smelled of old books and older power, the 6-month performance, the fake engagement, the careful lies built on top of desperate necessity. But Kael's warning echoed in her mind. No one can know. If word leaks, the entire plan collapses. I love him, Alara said, the lie tasting like ash. I know it's fast. I know it seems impossible. But when he looks at me, I feel— She searched for words that would sound real. Seen, valued, like I matter. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Oh, my darling girl, you've always mattered. Not to anyone who counts, not until Kyle. Alara pulled away, unable to bear the weight of her mother's grief. I'm tired. I need to rest. She climbed the stairs before Margaret could argue, before the lies could multiply further, before she broke down and confessed that everything was theater and she was drowning. Her room was small and cold, the furniture salvaged from the estate sale. Alara collapsed onto the bed and stared at the ceiling, counting cracks in the plaster like prison bars. Tomorrow, the engagement announcement would run. The invitations would pour in. The performance would intensify. And somewhere in the shadows, people who murdered obstacles would be watching, calculating, deciding if she was worth eliminating. Alara closed her eyes and wondered how long she could keep drowning before someone noticed she was already dead. Sleep came in fragments, broken by dreams of cold, dark eyes and kisses that felt real until she woke. Morning arrived with brutal efficiency. Isla burst into her room at dawn holding 3 newspapers, all of them folded to the society pages. Look! She spread them across the bed like trophies. You're in every single one. Alara sat up, her head pounding, and stared at the announcement that had transformed her life while she slept. Duke Kyle Draven is pleased to announce his engagement to Miss Alara Vance, daughter of Mr. Charles Vance and Mrs. Margaret Vance. The wedding is scheduled for early autumn. The couple met at the Ashford banquet and quickly discovered a profound connection based on mutual respect and shared values. Duke Draven expressed particular admiration for Miss Vance's courage and integrity in the face of recent family challenges. The engagement has been enthusiastically endorsed by both families. Below the announcement, a smaller paragraph caught her eye. This marks Duke Draven's first public courtship in 15 years of eligibility. Sources close to the Duke report that he has been profoundly affected by Miss Vance's character and determination. I have never seen him so certain of anything, one anonymous source stated. This is not strategy, this is genuine affection. Alara read the words 3 times, searching for the manipulation buried in them. Because Kyle had clearly planted that quote, the anonymous source was too convenient, too perfectly positioned to shape the narrative. But it was working. The other newspapers had picked up the story with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Some focused on the romance angle, the powerful Duke swept off his feet by an unlikely match. Others analyzed the political implications, what alliances this marriage might forge or destroy. One particularly vicious columnist questioned Alara's motives with thinly veiled accusations of gold digging. Everyone's talking about it, Isla breathed. Jenny saw Lady Pemberton's daughter at the market this morning, and she was furious. Apparently, she's been trying to catch Duke Draven's attention for 3 years. A knock sounded at the front door. Sharp, official, impossible to ignore. Margaret's voice drifted up from downstairs. Alara, you have visitors. Alara dressed hastily in one of the new gowns that had arrived yesterday. Emerald silk that made her feel like someone else entirely. Someone powerful. Someone who belonged in the world KL inhabited. She descended the stairs to find the sitting room transformed into something from a dream. Flowers. Dozens of arrangements in crystal vases that must have cost a fortune. White roses, orchids, lilies, hothouse blooms that had no business existing in spring. Cards were tucked among the petals, each one a small social grenade. Congratulations on your engagement. Lady Pemberton, what delightful news. Lady Ashford, we must discuss your wedding plans. Viscountess Thornwood. Every woman who'd sneered at her 3 days ago was now desperately attempting to secure her favor. They've been arriving since dawn, Margaret said quietly, along with these. She gestured to a silver tray overflowing with envelopes, invitations, each one more elaborate than the last. Dinner parties, theater boxes, charity galas, summer estate weekends. Alara picked one up at random. Lady Cressmore was hosting an intimate gathering, only 50 guests, and would be honored if the Duke and his fiancée would attend. There are 43 invitations, Margaret said. I counted. Before Alara could respond, another knock echoed through the house. This time, when the door opened, a footman in Draven livery stood on the steps holding a large wooden box. Delivery for Miss Vance, he announced. From His Grace. The box was carried inside and set on the sitting room table. Alara opened it with shaking hands. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a necklace that made her breath stop. Sapphires, dozens of them, set in platinum, arranged in a design so intricate it must have taken months to create. The stones caught the morning light and threw blue fire across the walls. A card rested on top. For tonight's opera. We have a box. I'll collect you at 7. K. That's worth more than our old manor, Margaret whispered. Isla reached out to touch the nearest stone, then pulled back as if afraid it might burn. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Alara lifted the necklace from its case, the weight shocking in her hands. This wasn't just jewelry, this was armor. A public declaration that she was under Draven's protection, backed by his wealth, untouchable. The message was clear. Touch her, and you answer to me. But as Alara fastened the clasp around her neck and felt the cold stones settle against her skin, she realized something else. The trap was closing, not around her enemies, around her. Because every gift, every public appearance, every performance was binding her tighter to a lie that was starting to feel dangerously close to truth. The opera house glittered like a jewel box designed by someone with too much money and not enough taste. Alara stepped out of Kael's carriage wearing the sapphires and a midnight blue gown that made her feel like royalty, and the crowd gathered outside the entrance actually gasped. They're staring, she whispered. Let them. Kael offered his arm, immaculate in formal black, and guided her toward the doors with the confidence of a man who owned the building, which, Alara realized with a jolt, he probably did. Inside, the lobby was chaos barely contained by velvet ropes and class distinctions. Aristocrats clustered in groups, their conversations dying as Alara and Kael passed. She could feel their eyes tracking her like predators watching prey. But this time, the stares felt different. Not contemptuous, not pitying, hungry. They wanted her favor, her attention, access to the man beside her. In 3 days, she'd gone from social pariah to the most sought-after woman in the capital. You're smiling, Kael murmured as they climbed the stairs toward his private box. Am I? Like a cat with cream. It's a good look on you. They entered the box, velvet seats, perfect sightlines, champagne already chilling in a silver bucket. And Alara realized with a start that they weren't alone. A woman sat in one of the chairs, her back to the door. When she turned, Alara's breath caught. She was beautiful in a way that transcended simple prettiness. Dark hair piled in elaborate curls, eyes like storm clouds, features that suggested both softness and steel. She wore crimson silk that probably violated 3 different decency laws, and her smile when she saw Kael was intimate enough to make Alara's stomach clench. Kael, darling, the woman said, rising with liquid grace. You didn't tell me you were bringing entertainment tonight. Kael's expression didn't change, but Alara felt him tense fractionally. Alara, may I present Lady Victoria Ashford. Victoria, my fiancée, Miss Alara Vance. Lady Victoria's smile sharpened. Fiancée? How utterly charming. I read the announcement this morning and thought it must be a mistake. No mistake, Kael said, his voice carrying a warning edge. How wonderful. Victoria's gaze swept over Alara like a general assessing enemy troops. Though I must confess, I'm surprised. When Kael and I were, she paused delicately, close, he swore he'd never marry, said he didn't trust anyone enough for that level of vulnerability. The words landed like a blade between Alara's ribs. When we were close. The implication was crystal clear. People change, Alara said, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. Perhaps Kael simply hadn't met the right person yet. Perhaps, Victoria settled back into her seat, crossing her legs with deliberate provocation. Or perhaps he's playing a game only he understands. Kael does love his strategies. Victoria! Kael's voice could have frozen fire. Leave. But I have a ticket. I'll refund it personally. Leave. Now. For a moment, Victoria's mask cracked, revealing fury underneath. Then she smiled again, collected her evening bag, and swept toward the door. She paused beside Alara just long enough to whisper, Ask him about his first engagement, darling. The one that ended so tragically. Then she was gone, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken threats. Alara turned to Kael, whose expression had shuttered completely. Your first engagement? Don't. The word was flat, final. Kael, I said don't. He moved to the railing, gripping it with white-knuckled hands. Victoria is a viper who trades in rumors and half-truths. Whatever she implied is designed to create doubt, division. That's how she operates. So there's no truth to it at all. The silence stretched too long. There was someone, Kael said finally, his voice so low Alara had to strain to hear it. A long time ago, before I learned that trust is a weapon people use against you. What happened? She died. The words were clipped, emotionless, and I don't discuss it, ever. Alara wanted to push, to demand answers, to understand the shadows that shaped this man she was legally bound to for 6 months. But the set of his shoulders, the rigid control in his posture, warned her that pressing now would shatter something fragile. All right, she said quietly. I'm sorry. Kael turned, surprise flickering across his face. You're not going to interrogate me? Would you answer if I did? No? Then what's the point? Alara moved to stand beside him at the railing, looking down at the crowd filling the orchestra seats. We all have ghosts, Kael. You don't owe me yours. Something in his expression softened. You're kinder than I expected. Don't mistake kindness for weakness. I never do. His hand found hers on the railing, threading their fingers together in a gesture that was becoming dangerously familiar. Thank you. For what? For not being Victoria. The opera began, something Italian and tragic about doomed love, but Alara barely heard it. She was too aware of Kael beside her, their hands still linked, the sapphires heavy around her neck like a beautiful chain. During the intermission, they descended to the lobby where champagne flowed and social hierarchies were reinforced through calculated conversation. Within minutes, they were surrounded. Lady Pemberton gushed about wedding plans. Lord Ashford offered congratulations that sounded like teeth grinding. The Huntington twins fawned over Alara's dress with transparent envy. And through it all, Kael remained at her side, steady, protective, deflecting cruelty with surgical precision. Miss Vance, a voice cut through the crowd like a knife. Alara turned to find a man she didn't recognize. Middle-aged, expensive suit, eyes that calculated value with merchant precision. Lord Hadley, Kael said, his tone cooling several degrees. I wasn't aware you attended cultural events. I make exceptions for special occasions. Hadley's smile didn't reach his eyes. Your engagement is certainly that. Tell me, Miss Vance, how does it feel to ascend so rapidly from ruin to royalty? The question was poisoned honey. Alara felt every nearby conversation pause, people leaning in to hear her response. I wouldn't know, she said pleasantly. I've never been ruined. My family faced a temporary setback caused by fraud, not failure. There's a difference. Hadley's smile tightened. Fraud. What an interesting accusation. It's not an accusation, Lord Hadley. It's a fact. Alara met his gaze steadily, and suddenly she understood. This was one of them. One of the syndicate members who'd destroyed her father. My father was defrauded by men who prey on trust and call it business. Men who've built fortunes on the ruins of families they've deliberately destroyed. The temperature in the lobby dropped 10 degrees. Hadley's expression went carefully blank. Those are serious claims, Miss Vance. Yes, they are. Kael's voice was silk over steel, which is why I've spent 3 years gathering evidence to support them. Evidence that will be presented to Parliament next month. Evidence that names names, details schemes, and traces money through shell companies designed to hide theft. Hadley's face went white. You're bluffing. Am I? Kael's smile was a predator baring teeth. Would you like to wager your freedom on that assumption? Because I assure you, Lord Hadley, when this evidence becomes public, the men behind the syndicate will face consequences. Criminal consequences, the kind that end with prison cells rather than country estates. The crowd around them had gone silent, every ear straining to hear. Hadley looked between Kael and Alara, calculation and panic warring in his eyes. Then he turned and walked away with the stiff gait of a man whose world was crumbling. The moment he was gone, conversation erupted like a breaking dam. Kael guided Alara toward a quieter corner, his hand steady at the small of her back. When they were relatively alone, he leaned down and whispered, "That was incredibly reckless and absolutely perfect." Alara's hands were shaking with adrenaline. "I just accused a lord of fraud in front of 100 witnesses. You spoke the truth, and you did it with enough conviction that everyone in this lobby now knows I'm serious, that this isn't political theater. It's a genuine crusade." Kael's eyes glittered with something close to pride. "You're magnificent when you're angry." "I'm terrified." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." He pressed a kiss to her temple, light, brief, devastatingly tender. "Come, let's watch the rest of the opera. We've given them enough drama for one evening." They returned to their box, and this time when Kael took her hand, Alara didn't pull away. Because somewhere between the garden party and tonight, between the performance and the truth, she'd stopped being certain where the lies ended and something real began. And that terrified her more than any syndicate ever could. The opera ended with tragedy, as all great operas do, but Alara barely registered the final notes or the thunderous applause that followed. Her mind was still trapped in that moment in the lobby, when she'd called out Lord Hadley in front of half the aristocracy, when Kael had stood beside her like a fortress made flesh, when the performance had stopped feeling like performance at all. The carriage ride back to her family's townhouse was silent, except for the clatter of wheels on cobblestones. Kael sat across from her, his expression unreadable in the shifting shadows cast by street lamps. "You're thinking too loud," he said finally. Alara looked up. "What happens now? After tonight?" Now they scramble. Hadley will warn the others. The syndicate will meet in secret, assess the threat, decide how to respond. Kael's voice was calm, analytical. "They have 3 options: buy me off, discredit me, or eliminate the evidence. And if they choose the 3rd option, then they'll target the witnesses, the families they've already destroyed." His eyes met hers. "Which is why your family is being moved to Draven House tomorrow morning. All of you, under guard." Alara's breath caught. "You can't just... My mother will never agree." "Your mother doesn't have a choice. Neither do you." Kael leaned forward, his intensity filling the small space. "The moment you confronted Hadley tonight, you painted a target on your family. They know you're not just my fiancé now. You're a co-conspirator, a witness who can testify to your father's fraud, someone who needs to be silenced." Fear coiled in Alara's stomach, cold and sharp. "Then I shouldn't have said anything. You did exactly what needed to be done. You made this real, made it impossible for anyone to claim I'm acting out of ambition rather than justice." Kael's hand found hers, his grip steady. "But consequences have consequences. Your family moves tomorrow. Non-negotiable." The carriage stopped outside her townhouse. Kael climbed out first and offered his hand, then walked her to the door with the careful formality of a suitor delivering his lady home after an evening's entertainment. On the threshold, he paused. "Alara," he said quietly, "what you did tonight, confronting Hadley, speaking truth to power, that took courage most people don't possess. I know this is frightening. I know you're in over your head, but you're handling it better than anyone I've ever worked with." "Worked with," Alara repeated, "not loved." The distinction hung between them like a drawn blade. Kael's expression shuddered. "We have a contract, not a romance." "I know." Alara forced herself to meet his eyes. "I just needed to hear you say it, to remind myself what this is." "And what is this?" "Survival, strategy, a performance that's starting to feel too real." She pulled her hand from his. "Good night, Kael." She slipped inside before he could respond, closing the door on his unreadable expression and her own confused heart. Morning arrived with chaos. Alara woke to the sound of raised voices downstairs, her mother's fury cutting through the walls like a knife. "Absolutely not! I will not be ordered about like a servant." "Mrs. Vance, please." A man's voice, unfamiliar and placating. "Don't Mrs. Vance me. This is my home, my family, and I will not abandon it because your employer has decided we're inconvenient." Alara threw on a dressing gown and rushed downstairs to find the sitting room filled with servants wearing Draven livery. Her mother stood in the center like a general defending her last position, while a nervous-looking steward tried to explain the situation. "What's happening?" Alara demanded. The steward turned with visible relief. "Miss Vance, His Grace sent us to facilitate your family's relocation to Draven House. We're to pack your belongings and arrange transport without asking us first?" Margaret's voice shook with rage. "Without even the courtesy of a conversation? Mother, don't." Margaret spun to face her. "Don't defend this, Alara. First, he sweeps you into an engagement with indecent haste. Then he showers us with money and gifts to buy our compliance. Now he's literally moving us into his house like we're possessions he's acquired, and you're just going to accept it?" The accusation hit hard because it was partially true. Alara had accepted the money, the protection, the contract that bound her to 6 months of lies. But she couldn't explain that without exposing everything. "It's for your safety," she said carefully. "After last night, after I confronted Lord Hadley—" "You did what?" Margaret's face went white. Alara glanced at the servants, acutely aware of too many ears. "Can we discuss this privately?" "There is no privacy anymore. Not with his servants invading our home, his money paying our debts, his will directing our lives." Margaret's hands trembled. "I have lost my home, my status, my husband's health. I will not lose my dignity too." "Mrs. Vance?" A new voice cut through the tension like a blade. Everyone turned to find Kael standing in the doorway, immaculate in a charcoal suit despite the early hour. "A word, please." It wasn't a request. Margaret's jaw set mutinously, but she followed him into the hallway, leaving Alara alone with the servants and her own churning guilt. Through the wall, she could hear murmured conversation, Kael's voice low and measured, her mother's rising in protest, then falling to shocked silence. When they emerged 10 minutes later, Margaret's face was ashen. "Pack everything," she said quietly. "We're moving to Draven House, today." "Mother," Alara started. "Don't!" Margaret held up a hand. "Just don't!" She walked upstairs with the mechanical precision of someone in shock, leaving Alara staring after her. "What did you tell her?" Alara asked Kael. "The truth." His expression was granite. "That 7 families have been destroyed by the syndicate. That 3 of them lost more than money. That if I can't protect your family, they'll be next." "You terrorized her." "I informed her. There's a difference." Kael moved closer, lowering his voice. "Your mother is intelligent enough to recognize genuine danger when it's presented clearly. She'll be angry for a while, but she'll be alive. That's what matters." He was right. Alara hated that he was right. The morning dissolved into organized chaos. Servants packed belongings with military efficiency. Carriages appeared to transport furniture and trunks. Within 3 hours, the townhouse was stripped to bare walls, and the Vance family stood on the street surrounded by the remnants of their previous life. Charles leaned heavily on his walking stick, his face gray with exhaustion. Isla clung to a small bag containing her most precious possessions, her eyes enormous. Margaret stood rigid as a statue, her expression carved from ice. And Kael directed the operation with the calm authority of a general moving troops, ensuring every detail was perfect, every comfort provided. Draven House swallowed them whole. The city estate was even more magnificent than Alara remembered. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, artwork that probably belonged in museums. Servants appeared and disappeared like ghosts, anticipating needs before they were voiced. The Vance family was installed in the East Wing, a suite of rooms so luxurious it felt like mockery compared to the cramped townhouse they'd left behind. "Your father will have the best bedroom," Kael explained, walking them through the space. "South-facing, plenty of sun. The doctor will visit daily to monitor his condition. Your mother's rooms connect to his via that door. Isla's suite is across the hall. And you," he turned to Alara, "will stay in the Duchess's chambers." Alara's stomach dropped. "The Duchess's chambers? They've been empty for 15 years, since my mother died." Kael's voice was carefully neutral. "They're the second finest rooms in the house. It's appropriate for my fiancé." The word landed like a stone in still water, creating ripples Alara couldn't quite track. Her mother made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. How generous to give my daughter your dead mother's rooms. Margaret, Charles said quietly, the first words he'd spoken since leaving the townhouse. Enough. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She turned and walked into her assigned suite, closing the door with deliberate care. Cale showed Charles and Isla to their rooms, then led Alara down a long corridor to a set of double doors inlaid with mother of pearl. This is yours, he said, pushing them open. The rooms beyond were breathtaking. A bedroom larger than the entire townhouse sitting room, decorated in shades of cream and gold. Massive windows overlooking gardens that seemed to stretch forever. A sitting area with furniture that looked antique and priceless. A dressing room that could have housed a small family. And everywhere, touches of a woman who'd once lived here. A hairbrush on the vanity, books on the shelves, a silk shawl draped over a chair, as if she'd just stepped out and would return any moment. You haven't touched her things, Alara said softly. No. Cale's voice was tight. I couldn't. Tell me about her. Why? Because I'm living in her space. Because everyone keeps mentioning her in whispers. Because... Alara turned to face him. Because I need to understand who you are, Kael, not just the strategist, the person underneath. For a long moment, she thought he'd refuse. Then something in his posture shifted, and he moved to the window, staring out at gardens he probably didn't see. Her name was Catherine, he said finally. She died when I was 17, childbirth complications. The baby died too. His voice was emotionless, reciting facts like testimony. My father followed her 6 months later. Heart failure, the doctor said. But I knew better. He died of grief. I'm so sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. Cale's reflection in the window was ghostly. But it taught me something important. Love is a liability. It makes you vulnerable, gives your enemies a target. My father was one of the most powerful men in the realm, and he let himself die because he couldn't imagine living without her. That's not strength. That's weakness. Or it's proof he loved her more than power. Same thing. Kyle turned from the window, his expression hard. Which is why I built my life around never making that mistake. Never trusting anyone enough to give them that kind of power over me. Never letting emotion override strategy. And Victoria? The question slipped out before Alara could stop it. Cale's jaw tightened. Was a mistake, a moment of weakness I learned from. What happened? She was everything I thought I wanted. Beautiful, intelligent, from an impeccable family. His mouth twisted. We were engaged for 3 months. Then I discovered she was feeding information about my business dealings to my competitors, using our intimacy as a weapon to gain advantage. Understanding dawned cold and clear. So you ended it. I destroyed her, methodically, publicly, made her a cautionary tale about what happens when you betray me. Cale's eyes were flat as stones, and I swore I'd never let anyone close enough to try it again. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Until me, Alara said quietly. This is different. We have a contract, clear terms, an expiration date, no emotions to complicate things. But something in his voice wavered fractionally. That's what makes it safe. Alara wanted to argue, to point out that safety built on lies was an illusion, but before she could speak, a knock sounded at the door. A servant entered, bowing. Your Grace, Mr. Blackwell is here with urgent news. Cale's expression hardened instantly. Where? The study, Your Grace. They found Blackwell standing by Cale's desk, his usually composed face tight with stress. He held a folder thick with documents. It started, he said without preamble. The syndicate is moving faster than we anticipated. Lord Hadley met with 3 other members this morning. They're planning to present a counter-narrative to Parliament next week, claiming you're engaged in a vendetta because of a failed business deal, using Miss Vance as a sympathetic prop. Kyle went very still. They're accusing me of fabricating evidence? Yes. And they're bringing witnesses who'll testify to your supposed vendetta. Business partners you've ruined, families you've crushed. They're going to paint you as the predator and themselves as victims of your ambition. That's absurd, Alara started. It doesn't matter if it's absurd, Kyle cut her off. What matters is whether Parliament believes it. And right now, the syndicate has enough influence to make their version plausible. Then we present our evidence first, Elara said. We can't. Not without tipping our hand and giving them time to destroy witnesses. Kale began to pace, his movements precise and contained. We need something they can't refute. Something public and undeniable that proves they're lying. Blackwell cleared his throat. There may be a way, but it's unconventional. Tell me. The Royal Charity Gala is in 3 days. Every major family will attend, including the syndicate members. It's covered by every newspaper, attended by members of Parliament, witnessed by hundreds. Blackwell hesitated. If you were to present your evidence there, publicly, dramatically, they couldn't suppress it. The scandal would be immediate and total. Kale stopped pacing. You're suggesting I turn a charity gala into a political assassination. I'm suggesting you use the theater they've already built. They're planning to whisper poison in Parliament's ear. You respond by shouting truth from a stage. Blackwell's eyes gleamed. It's risky. If you miscalculate, if the evidence isn't compelling enough, you'll destroy your own reputation. But if it works, we end them. Kale turned to Elara. What do you think? The question surprised her. He was asking her opinion, treating her like a genuine partner rather than a pawn. I think, Elara said slowly, that they've spent decades hiding behind respectability, using social position as a shield. If you strip that away publicly, in front of everyone who matters, they lose the only protection they have. It also makes you a target, Kyle warned. The moment I present this evidence, they'll know you're not just my fiancé. You're my co-conspirator. They'll attack you with everything they have. Let them. Elara lifted her chin. My family is already ruined. What else can they take? Your life, Kyle said quietly. They can take your life. The words should have terrified her. Instead, they kindled something fierce in her chest. Then we'd better make sure they don't get the chance. Kyle studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he turned to Blackwell. Prepare everything. I want every document, every witness statement, every piece of financial evidence organized and ready. We present at the gala in 3 days, and we make it so devastating they can't recover. Blackwell bowed and withdrew, leaving Elara and Kale alone in the study. This is it, Kale said. The moment we've been building toward. If this works, the syndicate falls. Your father's reputation is restored. Your family is safe. And you, he moved closer, his eyes searching hers. You get your life back. And us? The question slipped out before Elara could stop it. What happens to us when this is over? Kael's expression shuddered. The contract ends. You receive your settlement. We stage a quiet separation and move on with our lives. Of course. Elara forced a smile. The plan, the strategy, everything we agreed to. Yes, but the words sounded hollow, and neither of them seemed convinced. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Kael spent hours in his study with Blackwell, organizing evidence into a presentation that would be impossible to refute. Elara worked with them, adding details about her father's fraud, identifying patterns in the syndicate's operations, helping craft a narrative that was both compelling and devastating. And in the stolen moments between strategy sessions, she caught glimpses of a different Kael, one who laughed at her dry observations, who listened when she spoke, who looked at her sometimes like she was more than a chess piece in his elaborate game. Her mother remained coldly furious, refusing to speak to Kael except when absolutely necessary. But Charles improved under the doctor's care, gaining color and strength with each passing day. And Isla bloomed in the luxury of Draven House, her natural optimism reasserting itself. On the morning of the gala, a package arrived for Elara. Inside was a gown that made her previous dresses look like practice sketches, silver silk that caught light like water, embroidered with crystals that formed constellations across the fabric, a design so perfect it might have been made for her specifically, which Elara realized it had been. A note rested on top in Kael's precise handwriting. For tonight, when we change everything. Kay. She wore the dress like armor, the crystals catching every light, transforming her into something between a woman and a weapon. When she descended the stairs, Kael was waiting in the entrance hall. He looked up, and for just a moment, his careful control cracked. "You're stunning," he said, the words rough. "Thank you." Alara reached the bottom of the stairs and took his offered arm. "Are you ready? To destroy men who've preyed on the vulnerable for decades?" "Absolutely." His hand covered hers. "To do it in front of 1,000 witnesses with you beside me? That's more terrifying." "Why?" "Because—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider, then continued quietly. "Because somewhere in the last 2 weeks, this stopped being just strategy, and I'm not sure what to do with that." Alara's heart stuttered. "Kael, don't." He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture achingly familiar now. "Not yet. Let's survive tonight first. Then we'll figure out what we are." The Royal Charity Gala was held in the grand ballroom of the palace, a room so magnificent it made Lady Thornwood's estate look like a cottage. 2,000 guests filled the space in glittering waves of silk and jewels. The Crown Prince himself presided from a raised dais, flanked by ministers and members of Parliament. Orchestras played from hidden alcoves. Champagne flowed like rivers, and scattered throughout the crowd, Alara could identify them, the syndicate members. Lord Hadley near the refreshment tables, Baron Whitmore by the windows, Viscount Ashford laughing with a group of politicians. They looked comfortable, confident, untouchable. Not for long. Kael guided Alara through the crowd, greeting acquaintances with practiced charm while moving steadily toward the central stage where the evening's presentations would occur. Charity announcements, royal proclamations, the usual theater of aristocratic virtue. "Nervous?" he murmured. "Terrified," Alara admitted. "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." He stopped near the stage, positioning them perfectly. "When I'm called up to make my donation announcement, I'll present the evidence instead. You'll need to be ready. They'll turn on you the moment they understand what's happening." "I can handle it." "I know you can." Kael's hand tightened on hers. "That's why I chose you." The words should have hurt. A reminder that she'd been selected for strategic value rather than genuine affection. Instead, they steadied her. The evening's presentations began. Nobles announced donations with speeches designed to maximize social credit while minimizing actual charity. The crowd applauded politely, already drunk and bored. Then the master of ceremonies called Duke Kael Draven to announce his charitable contribution. Kael released Alara's hand and walked onto the stage with the calm authority of a man born to command. The crowd quieted, intrigued. The Duke rarely spoke at public events. "Your Highness, distinguished guests," Kael's voice carried across the vast ballroom without effort. "I stand before you tonight not to announce a charitable donation, but to present evidence of systematic fraud that has destroyed 7 families and threatens dozens more." Shocked silence rippled through the crowd. "For 3 years," Kael continued, "I have investigated a syndicate of lords who use fraudulent investment schemes to steal fortunes from vulnerable families. They hide behind respectability. They use social connections to avoid consequences. And they have operated with impunity because no one with power was willing to challenge them." Lord Hadley's face went white. Baron Whitmore started pushing toward the exits. Viscount Ashford looked like he might faint. "Tonight, that ends." Kael gestured, and Blackwell appeared with a stack of documents. "I have financial records proving the syndicate's operations. Witness statements from 7 families they've destroyed. Testimony from bankers who helped them hide stolen funds. And—" he pulled out a final document. A confession from one of their own members, who decided immunity was preferable to imprisonment. The ballroom erupted. Nobles surged forward, demanding to see the evidence. Ministers conferred in urgent whispers. The Crown Prince leaned forward, his expression deadly serious. Lord Hadley pushed through the crowd, his face purple with rage. "This is slander. Lies manufactured by a man with a vendetta." "Is it?" Kael's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Then explain this." He held up a ledger, opening it to a marked page. "Your signature. Approving a transfer of £20,000 from the Vance family account to a shell company you control. Dated 3 days after Mr. Charles Vance signed what he believed was a legitimate mining investment." Hadley's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "Or this." Kael pulled out another document. A letter from Baron Whitmore to Viscount Ashford, discussing how to maximize extraction from the Harcourt family before they realized the fraud, discussing tactics to discourage investigation if victims became suspicious. The crowd pressed closer, nobles shouting questions, demanding answers. These men, Cale's voice rose above the chaos, have operated in our midst for years, trusted, respected, using that trust as a weapon to prey on families in moments of vulnerability. They destroyed my fiancé's father, they've destroyed countless others, and they will continue unless we stop them. Tonight, he turned to the Crown Prince. Your Highness, I formally request a Crown investigation into the syndicate's operations. I will provide all evidence to the authorities, and I will testify under oath to everything I've presented here. The prince stood, and the ballroom fell silent. Duke Draven, he said, his voice carrying authority that transcended mere rank. Your accusations are serious. If proven false, they constitute slander of the highest order. I understand, Your Highness. But if proven true, the prince's gaze swept across Lord Hadley and his companions like a sword. They constitute crimes that demand the harshest consequences. I hereby authorize an immediate investigation. Lord Hadley, Baron Whitmore, Viscount Ashford, you will surrender yourselves to the Crown's justice pending the outcome of this inquiry. The three men didn't move, frozen in shock and horror. Guards, the prince said quietly. Royal guards appeared from the ballroom's perimeter, moving toward the syndicate members with implacable purpose. Hadley made a break for the exit. He didn't make it 3 steps before guards seized him, dragging him back while he screamed about conspiracies and vendettas. The ballroom erupted into chaos, nobles shouting, reporters scribbling frantically, the social order of the capital realigning itself in real time. And through it all, Kyle stood on the stage like a general surveying a won battlefield, his expression carved from stone. He descended the stairs and returned to Alara, who'd watched the entire scene unfold with her heart in her throat. It's done, he said quietly. They're finished. Alara couldn't speak, couldn't process the magnitude of what had just happened, so she did the only thing that made sense. She kissed him. In front of 2,000 witnesses, she pulled him down and pressed her lips to his with all the emotion she'd been suppressing for 2 weeks, gratitude and terror, and something far more dangerous tangled together into a kiss that tasted like victory and felt like surrender. When they broke apart, Cale was staring at her with an expression she'd never seen before, wonder mixed with something that looked almost like fear. Alara, he started. Don't, she whispered. Not here, not now, just... She grabbed his hand. Let's go home. They left the gala in a carriage that felt too small for the enormity of what had just happened. The night air was cool against Alara's flushed skin as they rode through streets that would be buzzing with gossip by morning. Kyle hadn't spoken since they'd left the ballroom. He sat across from her, his expression unreadable, his eyes tracking her face like he was trying to solve an equation that didn't add up. Say something, Alara finally said. Why did you kiss me? Because I wanted to. That's not part of the contract. I know. Alara met his gaze steadily. Maybe I'm tired of the contract. Maybe I'm tired of pretending this is all strategy when it stopped being that weeks ago. Cale went very still. What are you saying? I'm saying, Alara took a shaking breath, that I think you're brilliant and terrifying and the most frustrating man I've ever met. I'm saying that watching you destroy those men tonight was the most magnificent thing I've ever seen. I'm saying that somewhere between the performance and the partnership, I stopped acting. The confession hung between them like a lit fuse. Alara, Kyle's voice was rough. You don't know what you're asking for. Then tell me. Tell me why you're so afraid of this. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he moved across the carriage to sit beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. Because everyone I've ever let close has either betrayed me or died, he said quietly. My mother, my father, Victoria. I built my entire life around never making that mistake again, never giving anyone the power to destroy me. I'm not asking for power over you. I'm asking, Alara's voice caught. I'm asking you to take a risk, on me, on us, on the possibility that not everyone is a weapon waiting to turn against you. Kale's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Do you have any idea how dangerous you are?" he whispered. "To who?" "To me. To everything I've built. To every defense I've constructed." His eyes searched hers. "You walked into my life 3 weeks ago, and you've dismantled 15 years of careful control. You make me want things I swore I'd never want again. You make me feel—" He broke off, something raw flickering across his face. "What?" Alara pressed. "What do you feel?" "Terrified," Kael admitted. "Because what started as a contract has become something I don't know how to manage. And I've built my entire life on managing outcomes. Maybe some things aren't meant to be managed." Alara's hand covered his where it rested against her face. "Maybe some things you just have to trust." "I don't trust easily." "I know, but I'm asking you to try." The carriage stopped outside Draven House. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Kael leaned in and kissed her with a hunger that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with weeks of suppressed want finally breaking free. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Kael's eyes were dark with something that looked like surrender. "Stay with me," he said. "Not because of the contract, not because of strategy. Stay because you want to. Because this," he gestured between them, "is real. Even if it's terrifying. Even if I don't know how to do this." Alara's heart stuttered. "What about the contract? The 6 months? The planned separation?" "To hell with the contract." Kael's smile was sharp and genuine. "I'll tear it up right now if you'll have me. Not as a business partner, not as a strategic alliance, as—" he seemed to struggle with the word, "as something real, something permanent." "Are you asking me to marry you?" Alara whispered. "Actually marry you?" "I'm asking you to take a chance on a man who spent 15 years avoiding exactly this. I'm asking you to be patient while I figure out how to do this without treating it like a campaign. I'm asking—" his voice dropped— "for something I swore I'd never ask for again. A genuine partnership, with someone I trust, someone I—" He stopped. The word caught in his throat. "Someone you what?" Alara prompted, her own heart racing. "Someone I love," Kael said, and the admission sounded like it had been dragged out of him by force. "Even though it's insane, even though we met 3 weeks ago, even though every rational part of my brain is screaming that this is a mistake." Alara felt tears sting her eyes. "It's not a mistake." "How do you know?" "Because I love you too." The words came easily, naturally, as if she'd been waiting to say them for longer than 3 weeks. "You're difficult and calculating, and you approach everything like it's a battle to win. But you're also brilliant and protective, and underneath all that armor, you're capable of more kindness than you let anyone see. And I want to be the person you show that kindness to, every day, for the rest of our lives." Kael pulled her into his arms, holding her with a fierceness that spoke of years of loneliness finally breaking. "Marry me," he said against her hair. "Not in 3 months, not for show. Tomorrow, next week, as soon as we can arrange it. Marry me and let's build something that's ours. Not a performance, not a strategy, just us." Alara pulled back just enough to see his face. "Yes." "Yes?" "Yes." She laughed, the sound edged with tears. "To all of it. Tomorrow, next week, building something real. Yes." Kael kissed her again, and this time there was nothing calculated about it. Just 2 people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their respective wars and decided to build something new from the ruins. They married 2 weeks later in a ceremony that shocked the capital for its simplicity. No grand cathedral, no 1,000 guests, just a small chapel on the Draven estate with Alara's family present and a handful of trusted friends. The Crown Prince attended as witness, lending royal approval to a union that had already rewritten the social rules. Alara wore white silk that caught the afternoon light. Kael wore formal black and looked at her like she was the only person in the world. When the minister asked if anyone objected, silence filled the chapel. The kind of silence that comes from witnesses who know they're watching something genuine rather than strategic. And when Kael kissed his bride, the applause was warm and real. The syndicate's trial proceeded through the courts with ruthless efficiency. Lord Hadley and his companions were convicted of fraud, theft, and conspiracy. Their estates were seized. their titles revoked. Their names became synonymous with predatory greed. The 7 families they'd destroyed received restitution. Charles Vance's health improved dramatically once the weight of shame was lifted. Isla returned to her academy with her future restored. Margaret, after weeks of cold fury, grudgingly admitted that Kael had perhaps earned the privilege of marrying her daughter. And Alara, who'd walked into a ballroom 3 weeks earlier expecting humiliation and found a partner instead, stood beside her husband at the window of Draven House and looked out at gardens that now belonged to both of them. "What are you thinking?" Kael asked, his arms wrapped around her from behind. "That I walked into the worst trap imaginable and somehow found the best thing that ever happened to me." Alara leaned back against him. "That I was so busy surviving I almost missed falling in love." "I did miss it," Kael admitted. "I thought I was executing a strategy. By the time I realized I'd fallen in love with you, it was too late to protect myself." "Do you regret it?" "Not for a second. For a poseum." He turned her to face him, his expression open in a way it had never been before that night in the carriage. "You walked into my life and dismantled every defense I'd built. You made me believe trust was possible, that partnership didn't have to mean vulnerability, that love could be strength instead of weakness. And now? Now I wake up every morning grateful that Genevieve Margrave is a vindictive social climber who dared you to approach me." Kael's smile was genuine and warm. "Without her cruelty, I never would have met the woman who changed everything." Alara laughed. "Should we send her a thank you note?" "Absolutely not. She's still recovering from the social annihilation of being publicly cut by half the aristocracy." Kael pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Let her stew in obscurity. We have better things to do." "Such as?" "Building a life. Running a duchy. Maybe—" He paused, suddenly uncertain. "Maybe starting a family, if that's something you want?" Alara's breath caught. They'd been married 2 months, and already he was thinking about their future, planning for permanence instead of exit strategies. "Yes," she said. "I want that. All of it." "Good." Kael pulled her closer. "Because I spent 15 years believing I was better off alone. And you've spent the last 3 months proving I was magnificently wrong." They stood together in the window, watching the sun set over gardens that had once belonged to a duchess who'd died too young, now claimed by a new duchess who'd survived everything thrown at her and emerged stronger. Somewhere in the city, people were still gossiping about the scandal, about the Duke who'd publicly destroyed a criminal syndicate, about the disgraced girl who'd become a duchess, about a romance that had started as performance and become legend. But inside Draven House, in rooms filled with light and laughter and the kind of love that transforms survival into triumph, Alara and Kael had stopped caring what anyone else thought. They'd walked into fire together, and they'd emerged forged into something unbreakable. Years later, when people asked how they'd met, Alara would smile and say it started with a dare that should have destroyed her, and Kael would add that it ended with a choice that saved them both. The truth, they both knew, was more complicated. It had started with cruelty and desperation, with a woman who had nothing left to lose and a man who'd forgotten how to trust, with a contract designed to manipulate social hierarchies and destroy predators. But it had ended with something neither of them expected. It had ended with 2 people standing together against a world that had tried to break them both, choosing partnership over isolation, love over strategy, and a future built on truth instead of performance. The dare had been meant to humiliate Alara. Instead, it had led her into the harshest battlefield imaginable and forged her into someone no one would ever dare challenge again.